Tariq Johnson had always felt like he was on the edge of something big. He just couldn't quite grasp it. That's the way life had been for him, almost there, but never quite able to cross the finish line. A kid from Detroit, raised in the roughest corners of the city, he wasn't supposed to make it this far. But somehow, he had. The early morning sun filtered through the cracked blinds of the lecture hall, casting a streak of light across the rows of empty chairs. Tariq sat in the back, his head down, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. His eyes, though, were glued to the whiteboard at the front of the room. The equations, the numbers, they spoke to him in a way no one else understood. It wasn't magic, it was just something in his bones. He could see patterns, solutions, where others only saw chaos. His mind had been racing for weeks now, consumed by one problem. A problem so big that the U.S. government had thrown millions of dollars at it and failed. The problem? An energy crisis, a need to find more sustainable solutions to power the nation's grid without relying on fossil fuels. A problem that seemed impossible to solve, until Tariq saw something in the data. The bell rang, signaling the end of the lecture. But Tariq didn't budge. He stayed in his seat, still staring at the whiteboard, a fire lighting up in his chest. He had a breakthrough, he was sure of it. He just needed to test the theory. The math wasn't flawless, but it was close enough to give him hope. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, ignoring the other students as they packed up their things and filed out. He wasn't ready to go yet. Not now. He'd worked for too long on this. Tariq, you still here? The voice belonged to Professor Pierce, the one person at the university who had always believed in him. A middle-aged man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, he stepped up to Tariq with a mix of curiosity and concern. Yeah, just working through something, Tariq muttered, his eyes still scanning the equations in front of him. Professor Pierce raised an eyebrow. That's your fourth time running through that same problem in the last month. You know the odds, right? The government has spent millions on this. The best minds in the world couldn't crack it. What makes you think you can? Tariq turned to face him, his jaw tightening. Because I see something they don't. I see a pattern no one's looking for. Pierce chuckled softly, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. You're a stubborn one, Tariq. I'll give you that. Just, don't get too far ahead of yourself. People will start asking questions. Tariq nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He didn't care about the questions. The questions didn't matter. What mattered was the solution. He knew in his gut that he was on the verge of something huge. And it wasn't just about the problem. It was about proving everyone wrong. As Tariq packed his things and headed out of the classroom, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting it to be a message from his mom. But when he saw the name on the screen, his heart sank. It was from the university's administration. Urgent, due to an incident during yesterday's lab session, your access to the laboratory has been suspended. Please see the office for further details. Admin. Tariq's stomach dropped. The incident. He knew exactly what they were referring to. Last week, during his chemistry lab, something went wrong. A reaction that should have been controlled spiraled out of control. It wasn't his fault. It was a mistake, a freak accident. But no one cared about the details. They just saw the outcome. A mess. And now, it looked like the university was using that as an excuse to get rid of him. He took a deep breath, trying to push down the anger rising in his chest. He'd been here before. Every time something went wrong, it was always his fault. They didn't see him as a student who made mistakes, they saw him as a problem. A hopeless student from the wrong side of town. Tariq shoved the phone back in his pocket and walked out of the building, his mind spinning. It wasn't fair. He'd worked so hard to get here. He'd fought for every scrap of knowledge, every ounce of validation. And now, because of one mistake, they were going to take it all away. The sun was higher in the sky now, beating down on his face as he stepped onto the campus quad. Students were laughing and talking in groups, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He felt like an outsider, a shadow on the edge of something he didn't belong to. But that was nothing new. As Tariq made his way to the administration office, he felt a tightness in his chest. He had to fix this. He couldn't let them win. They'd already tried to write him off once before, and he wasn't about to let them do it again. The office was quiet when he entered, the secretary behind the desk barely looking up from her computer as he approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat. "I'm Tariq Johnson," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I got the message about my lab suspension." She glanced at the screen in front of her, then back at him. "Ah, yes. I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. The decision's final." Tariq's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean, final?" "It was an accident. A freak accident. It's not my fault." The secretary didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, but the administration has already decided. Your suspension is effective immediately." Tariq's fists clenched at his sides. He had to bite his tongue to keep from yelling. There was no point. It wouldn't change anything. They didn't care about the truth. They only cared about their rules. And he was just a statistic, a name on a list. Walking out of the office, the weight of the situation settled heavy on his shoulders. He didn't know where to go from here. He couldn't go back to his dorm. He couldn't go back to his mom. There was nowhere to hide. The world had a way of putting people like him in a box and telling them they'd never get out. But that wasn't how Tariq saw it. He refused to be defined by their labels. He looked up at the clear blue sky and felt something stirring inside him, a fire he couldn't ignore. They thought he was done. They thought he was hopeless. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. The question was no longer about solving the energy problem. It was about proving them all wrong. Tariq had nothing left to lose. And everything to gain. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Tariq didn't go home that afternoon. He couldn't. The thought of facing his mother, explaining why he'd been suspended again, made his stomach twist. She had worked so hard to get him here, to this university, and now it seemed like it was all falling apart. She had always believed in him, even when the rest of the world didn't. She didn't deserve this. Instead, he found himself at the library. The hushed silence of the place was comforting, like a second home. There were no people here who would judge him for his failures, no eyes watching his every move. He could disappear into the rows of books and equations, where the world's problems didn't seem so overwhelming. His fingers brushed across the worn spines of books on physics and chemistry, the same ones he had pored over late into the nights, searching for answers. But today, those books didn't offer the comfort they usually did. He needed something more than equations, he needed a breakthrough. He needed to prove that his ideas weren't just pipe dreams. Sitting down at a desk by the window, he opened his laptop, the screen lighting up with his most recent work. His hands hovered above the keyboard, but the words didn't come. The problem he had been obsessing over, the energy crisis, the unsolvable equation that had plagued scientists for decades, was still there, taunting him. The numbers seemed to mock him, the problem twisting and turning in his mind like an uncrackable code. He had made progress, yes, but something wasn't right. The model he was working on didn't match up with the data he had found. It was like he was on the edge of something monumental, but he couldn't quite reach it. Every solution felt just out of grasp. Frustration boiled in his chest, and he slammed the laptop shut. He could feel the weight of the suspension pressing down on him. If he couldn't fix this, if he couldn't crack the code, it would be another failure. Another reminder that people like him didn't get second chances. A voice broke his thoughts. "You look like you could use some coffee." Tarek turned to see Maya standing there, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee in her hands. She had a warm smile, the kind that was hard to resist, even in the darkest of times. Maya was a fellow student at the university, but unlike most of the students Tarek interacted with, she didn't look at him with disdain or pity. They had bonded over shared frustrations, over the pressure of trying to succeed in a place that wasn't built for people like them. "Thanks," Tarek said, taking the cup from her. He tried to smile, but it felt hollow. Maya raised an eyebrow. "What's going on with you? You've been holed up here for days." Tarek shrugged, his eyes back on the laptop. "I got suspended. For a lab accident." His voice was flat, like he was already tired of talking about it, even though the words still stung. Maya didn't flinch. "That's bullshit," she said, her voice sharp. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Tell that to the administration," Tarek muttered. "They don't care. I'm just another screw-up to them." Maya sat down across from him. "Well, screw them. They don't know what they're talking about. You're the one who's been pushing the boundaries here, Tarek. You're the one who's on the verge of something big." He looked up at her, surprised. "You think so?" She nodded, her eyes serious. "I've seen you work. You're smarter than anyone else in this place. I've seen the way you think, the way you solve problems. You're onto something, Tarek. You just need to trust yourself." Tarek looked down at the coffee in his hands. Trust himself. It was easier said than done. Every time he thought he was on the verge of a breakthrough, something came along to knock him back down. It felt like the universe had a personal vendetta against him. But there was something in Maya's voice, something in the way she looked at him that made him want to believe her. Maybe she was right. Maybe he just needed to trust that he had the ability to finish what he started. "I don't know if I can do it," Tarek said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, look at me. I've screwed up every chance I've had. The university doesn't want me here. The government doesn't want me here. No one believes I can solve this." Maya leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "That's exactly why you have to do it. You don't need their approval. You don't need anyone's approval. You just need to prove to yourself that you can. Don't let them define you, Tarek. You define you." Tarek stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent his whole life being defined by other people, by the neighborhood he grew up in, by the color of his skin, by the mistakes he'd made. But Maya was right. He didn't have to let them define him. He had the power to change his own story. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about solving the energy problem. It wasn't even about proving the world wrong. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of greatness. That he was more than the sum of his failures. Tarek stood up, his eyes burning with renewed determination. "You're right," he said, his voice steady now. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to prove them all wrong." Maya smiled, standing up with him. "I knew you would." Tarek turned back to his laptop, his fingers poised over the keys. For the first time in weeks, the equations didn't seem so daunting. He had a plan, and it was going to work. He was going to solve this problem, not because anyone expected him to, but because he believed he could. And as he dove back into the numbers, he realized something else. He wasn't just a student from Detroit anymore. He wasn't just another name on the university's roster. He was Tarek Johnson, and he was going to change the world. But first, he had to solve the problem no one else could. The days following his conversation with Maya felt like they moved in a blur. Tarek's resolve was unwavering. He buried himself in the library, working tirelessly on the energy model that had haunted him for weeks. The suspension, the doubts, the setbacks, they all faded into the background as he let his mind roam freely in the world of numbers and equations. For once, he wasn't consumed by fear of failure. Instead, he was driven by something deeper, the hunger to prove that he could solve the unsolvable. His usual spot in the library became a second home. It wasn't the quiet, sterile atmosphere that gave him comfort. No, it was the fact that it was his space now. He had control here. The world outside could dismiss him, judge him, write him off, but in this room, surrounded by books and notes, he was in charge. And he would not back down. Maya checked in on him every few days, bringing him coffee or just sitting across from him in silence, letting him work at his own pace. She was his only lifeline, the only one who had ever truly believed in him. At times, he could feel her watching him from across the room, but she never interrupted. She simply gave him the space he needed. Her support meant everything. But Tariq wasn't looking for approval anymore. He was looking for answers. One particularly late evening, with the library nearly empty, Tariq finally saw it, the missing piece. It was a small detail, almost too insignificant to notice, but once his eyes locked onto it, everything else fell into place. He could feel his heart race in his chest as he stared at the screen, the patterns forming into something real, something tangible. He wasn't just seeing numbers anymore. He was seeing the solution. The equations on his laptop seemed to hum, the variables coming together like pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to force together for so long. Tariq's hands shook as he typed out the final calculation. It wasn't perfect, he knew it wasn't, but it was close enough to prove that it could work. He sat back, staring at the results in awe. The formula he had developed was elegant, simple even, in a way that no one else had thought to apply before. It was a system that could stabilize energy production while minimizing environmental impact. It wasn't a full solution yet, but it was a step in the right direction. A massive one. A burst of exhilaration flooded through him. He couldn't believe it. He had done it. He picked up his phone and quickly dialed Maya's number, his fingers trembling with excitement. "Hello," she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Maya, it's done," Tariq said breathlessly. "I've got it. I've got the solution." There was a beat of silence before Maya's voice broke through. "Wait, what? You mean?" "I mean it," Tariq interrupted, unable to contain his excitement. "The energy model, it works. I've solved it. I found the missing variable. This could change everything." There was a pause, and then Maya laughed, a bright, infectious sound. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." "Tariq, that's amazing." Tariq smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "I'm not done yet. I still have to test it, but this is it. This is the breakthrough I've been looking for." Maya's voice became serious. "Do you realize what this means, right? You've done what the government couldn't do. You've done what they spent millions on, and you've cracked it." Tariq leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. What now? The answer was clear, he needed to share this with the world. But who would believe him? He was just a suspended student, a nobody. No one would take him seriously, especially not the government. Still, the excitement in his chest refused to be dimmed. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was about changing the world. "I need to run some tests to make sure it works," Tariq said, his voice already shifting to a more methodical tone. "But I'm going to make this happen. I just need to figure out the next step." Maya's voice softened. "Tariq, I think you need to think bigger. You can't just do this on your own anymore. You've got something huge here. You need to reach out. Get someone who has the resources to help you. If this works, it could be a game changer." Tariq thought about her words. Think bigger. He had always been good at staying in the shadows, working in the quiet corners of a university where no one bothered him. But Maya was right. If this formula worked, it wasn't just a breakthrough, it was a revolution. He couldn't keep this to himself. He had to share it. "Who am I supposed to reach out to?" Tariq asked, his voice uncertain. Who's going to listen to me? You've got connections, Tarek. You've been around these people long enough, Maya replied. The professors, the researchers, they're your gateway. Reach out to them. Show them your work. Tarek ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. Reach out to the professors. He knew that Maya was right. If he could get someone in power, someone who could validate his work, he could finally get the recognition he deserved. But who? He didn't have to think for long. His mind settled on one name. Professor Pierce. The very same professor who had always pushed him, believed in him even when Tarek had doubted himself. Pierce was one of the few people who had supported him when everyone else turned their backs. He had always said Tarek had potential. Now, Tarek was about to show him just how right he had been. I'm going to reach out to Pierce, Tarek said finally. He'll listen. Maya was quiet for a moment, and then she said, good choice. Just make sure you've got your facts straight. When you go to him, you've got to be ready. I will, Tarek said. I won't let this slip away. This is my chance. As he hung up the phone, Tarek took a deep breath and looked back at his screen. The equations, the numbers, the solution, it was all there, laid out in front of him. This was no longer just a personal victory. This was the start of something much bigger. Tarek was about to change everything. And it would all start with one phone call. Tarek sat at his desk the next morning, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The numbers and equations he had spent so long developing were still fresh in his mind, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the phone call he had to make. He had to reach out to Professor Pierce. Professor Pierce wasn't just any faculty member at the university. He was one of the top researchers in the field of renewable energy, a man with connections, funding, and a reputation that extended far beyond the campus. Tarek had attended a few of his lectures in the past, always impressed by how effortlessly Pierce explained complex theories and cutting-edge technologies. But more than that, Tarek had felt a quiet respect from the professor. Pierce had always seen something in him, even when others had dismissed him as just another struggling student. Tarek wasn't naive. He knew reaching out to Pierce was no small thing. The professor was busy, often surrounded by a team of researchers who were all vying for his attention. Tarek wasn't even officially in the program anymore, his suspension still weighed heavily on his record. But this breakthrough, it was bigger than all of that. If Tarek could convince Pierce that his energy model was the real deal, everything would change. For both of them. He took a deep breath and dialed the professor's number, feeling the weight of the moment. The phone rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. Dr. Pierce speaking. Professor Pierce, Tarek said, trying to keep his voice steady. This is Tarek Johnson. I was hoping to speak with you about something important. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line before Pierce responded. Tarek Johnson. Yes, I remember you. What's this about? Tarek swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this a dozen times, but now that he was actually speaking to the professor, the words seemed to vanish. He took another breath, pushing past the nerves. I've been working on something, Tarek began, his voice gaining strength. Something that I think could change the way we think about renewable energy. I've solved a problem that the government and top researchers have been spending millions of dollars on. It's about stabilizing energy production in a way no one's been able to do before. And I think I've got the solution. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, and Tarek's heart raced. Had he gone too far? Was Pierce going to laugh him off? I see, Pierce said slowly, his voice now more measured. That's quite a claim, Tarek. You're saying you've solved a problem the government couldn't? Yes, sir. I believe I have. The model I've developed stabilizes energy flow while reducing environmental impact. I've been working on it for weeks, and I've already run the initial calculations. The numbers, they line up. Another long pause. Can you send me your data? Pierce finally asked, his tone neutral but interested. I'll take a look. If what you're saying is true, this could be quite significant. Tariq's heart skipped a beat. Of course, sir. I'll send it over right away. Good. Let's see what you've got. But be prepared, Tariq. If I take this seriously, it's not just your reputation on the line. It's mine, too. I expect you to be thorough. Tariq nodded, even though Pierce couldn't see him. I understand, Professor. Thank you for giving me a chance. Before Tariq could say anything else, Pierce hung up. Tariq sat frozen for a moment, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. He had done it. He had made the first step. But now came the hard part, proving it. He immediately opened his laptop and began compiling the data into a presentable format. His fingers flew over the keys as he formatted the equations, cleaned up the graphs, and ensured that every variable was clearly explained. It wasn't just a matter of presenting the numbers, it was about making the professor believe in his work. Tariq needed to show Pierce that this wasn't just another experiment, it was a solution. A real, viable solution to one of the world's biggest problems. Once the presentation was ready, he sat back and took a breath. His hands were still trembling from the call. He looked at the clock, it was already late afternoon. He didn't want to waste any more time. Tariq clicked send, and the data was off. Now all he could do was wait. The next few days felt like an eternity. Tariq spent every waking hour tweaking the model, testing small adjustments in the calculations, and reviewing the data. Every time his phone rang, his heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't Pierce. The silence was deafening. Tariq had a feeling that the professor wasn't the kind of man who would respond right away. But that didn't stop the anxiety from gnawing at him. It was late in the evening on the third day when Tariq's phone finally rang. Professor Pierce, he answered immediately, his voice thick with anticipation. Tariq, I've gone through your data, Pierce said, cutting straight to the point. I'm impressed. The model you've proposed, it's unconventional, but it could work. I want to discuss it further. Can you meet with me tomorrow morning? Tariq could hardly believe what he was hearing. Yes, absolutely. I'll be there. Good, Pierce replied. I'll see you at 9 a.m. in my office. As Tariq hung up, a wave of relief washed over him. He had done it. He had convinced Pierce to take him seriously. Now, the real test began. The following morning, Tariq woke up earlier than usual. He couldn't afford to be late. He was prepared, he had gone over the numbers again, and again, and again. Every detail was burned into his memory. But that didn't make the impending meeting any less intimidating. Tariq entered the building, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. He had been here countless times before, but today it felt different. He was no longer the student in the background. Today, he was the one with the solution. Today, he was the one with the power. Professor Pierce's office was tucked away at the far end of the building, as though he were deliberately hiding from the rest of the world. When Tariq knocked, the professor's voice called out from inside. Come in. Tariq opened the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with books, papers, and various scientific models. Professor Pierce was standing at his desk, looking at something on his computer screen. He glanced up as Tariq entered and motioned for him to sit. Good morning, Tariq. Let's get to it, Pierce said, his tone professional but not unkind. Tariq sat down, opening his laptop. I've brought everything here, he said, his hands steady. Every calculation, every assumption, and the possible real-world applications. Professor Pierce nodded. Let's see what you've got. Tariq's heart raced, but his mind was clear as he began presenting his findings. This was his moment, and he was ready. Tariq's pulse quickened as he opened his laptop and began to present his data. The screen flickered for a moment, displaying the detailed energy model he had spent weeks refining. As Professor Pierce leaned over his desk, examining the data on the screen, Tarek could hardly breathe. The weight of the moment hung heavily between them. He could feel his mind racing, but his voice was steady, careful. "I've applied several equations from basic energy stabilization theory," Tarek began. "What makes this model different from others is its capacity to adapt to fluctuating inputs. Most current energy systems rely on fixed parameters that don't allow for effective stabilization in real-world conditions. My model, however, is dynamic. It adjusts based on changes in the energy source, whether it's solar, wind, or even geothermal." Pierce remained silent, staring at the screen. Tarek couldn't read his expression, but he knew that if Pierce didn't understand the significance of what he was showing, all of this would be for nothing. Tarek had to make him see the potential. He had to make Pierce believe. The key breakthrough is in how the system compensates for fluctuations without causing a ripple effect in the overall power grid, Tarek continued. In layman's terms, it prevents the system from failing or overloading when energy sources suddenly shift. This could lead to a reduction in blackouts and more efficient energy distribution. Pierce leaned back in his chair, eyes still locked on the screen. Tarek couldn't tell if the professor was impressed, skeptical, or just taking his time to process it all. The silence stretched on, making Tarek's nerves flare. After what felt like an eternity, Pierce finally spoke. "This model you've developed. If it works as you say, it could change the entire landscape of renewable energy," he said, his voice calm but measured. "But there's one thing I need to ask: how confident are you that it will work outside of this theoretical environment? In the real world, under the stress of large-scale applications?" Tarek's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't falter. "I've run several simulations with a variety of energy scenarios. I've accounted for changes in weather, demand peaks, and maintenance schedules. While the model has yet to be tested on an industrial scale, the simulations were promising. The math checks out." Pierce tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. "The math checks out," he repeated slowly. "You've got the theory down, but as you know, theory and reality don't always align. We'll need to run some physical tests to confirm it works in practice. That's where things get tricky." Tarek nodded. "I understand, but I've put in a lot of work to ensure that these calculations have a high degree of reliability. If we test it, I'm confident it will deliver." Pierce stared at the screen for a long time, then turned his gaze to Tarek. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You've done impressive work, no doubt. But we need to see results." Tarek felt a knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "I thought, you said this could change everything." "I didn't say it would change everything, Tarek," Pierce replied, his voice sharp. "What I said is that it could. Right now, it's potential, nothing more. But potential is what gets funding, it's what gets attention, and it's what gets tested. We'll need to prove it." Tarek's mind spun, processing the professor's words. The weight of the task before him suddenly felt immense. His model wasn't just a groundbreaking discovery, it was a gamble. If it didn't work, everything he had built would come crashing down, and so would his credibility. "And who do we go to for the testing?" Tarek asked, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We need funding. Resources." Pierce leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I know people," he said quietly. "But you need to be ready for the challenges ahead. If this works, it'll be a major breakthrough. But if it doesn't, you'll have to face the consequences." Tarek felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let this slip away. He had come this far. He had the solution, and now, he just needed to prove it. "I'm ready," Tarek said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Pierce nodded, almost approvingly. "Good. Then we'll start small, testing your model in controlled environments. I'll reach out to a few contacts in the energy industry. They're always looking for promising innovations. But remember, this won't be easy. You'll be up against industry giants with far more resources than we have. Tarek's mind raced. He had come this far, he couldn't stop now. I'm not afraid of competition, he said, meeting the professor's gaze. This could change everything. Not just for me, but for the world. Professor Pierce stared at him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. All right, Tarek. Let's take this to the next level. Tarek felt a rush of adrenaline. The next level. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Later that afternoon, after meeting with Professor Pierce, Tarek went back to his dorm room, his head still spinning. What had just happened? He had presented his work to one of the most respected researchers in the field, and not only had Pierce acknowledged the potential, but he had agreed to help take it further. Tarek sat down on his bed and pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen before he typed a quick message to Maya. It's happening. Pierce is on board. We're going to test the model with some real-world scenarios. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The phone buzzed almost immediately. I knew you could do it, Tarek. This is just the beginning. Let's make it happen. Tarek smiled, feeling the weight of Maya's words sink in. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something much bigger. The world had no idea what was coming, but Tarek knew this was his shot. He wasn't just going to prove everyone wrong, he was going to change the world. He glanced out the window, the sun beginning to set on the horizon. A quiet sense of purpose washed over him. This was his moment. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The days that followed were a blur. Tarek was barely getting any sleep, yet he felt more alive than he had in months. The moment he'd been waiting for had finally arrived. Professor Pierce had agreed to help him test his model. But Tarek knew the real work had only just begun. They were about to take the leap from theory to reality, and that was a dangerous place to be. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. After the meeting with Pierce, Tarek threw himself into perfecting every aspect of his model. He spent hours at his computer, running simulations, adjusting parameters, and verifying every single calculation. He couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. This wasn't just a test, it was the proving ground for everything he had worked for. He was betting his future on this, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. Pierce's contacts in the energy industry were not easy to access. Tarek had been warned, these were powerful people, ones who wouldn't hesitate to dismiss a young, unproven student if the results weren't convincing enough. But Tarek wasn't worried. He believed in his work. He knew this could change everything. 2 days after their initial meeting, Tarek received an email from Professor Pierce. The subject line read, "Meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m., industry partners interested." Tarek's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The next morning, Tarek arrived at the university's research building earlier than usual, wearing a crisp button-up shirt and dark jeans. He was nervous, but determined. This meeting could be the moment that either launched his career or sent him back to square one. He walked down the familiar halls, his footsteps echoing in the otherwise empty building. As he neared the conference room where the meeting was scheduled, he found himself second-guessing everything. What if they didn't take him seriously? What if they found a flaw in his model that Pierce had overlooked? Tarek shook his head, pushing away the doubts. Focus, he told himself. You've got this. The conference room was bustling with activity when Tarek entered. He immediately spotted Professor Pierce at the head of the table, surrounded by 3 men and a woman. They were all dressed in expensive suits, their serious expressions making it clear that they didn't waste time on unworthy ventures. Tarek could feel the weight of their eyes on him as he stepped inside, but he refused to shrink under their gaze. This was his moment. Tarek, Pierce greeted him with a nod. These are the individuals I mentioned. I'd like you to meet the team. They're from Green Tech Industries, one of the leading companies in renewable energy innovation. The group nodded at Tarek, but none of them spoke. They just watched him with an air of quiet scrutiny, as if sizing him up. Tarek forced himself to stay calm, his pulse steady as he took a seat at the table. Professor Pierce gave him a subtle nod, signaling for him to begin. Tarek opened his laptop, carefully setting up his presentation. The flicker of the screen was the only sound as he prepared to show them what he had been working on for so long. So, Tarek began, his voice steady, what I've developed is a model for stabilizing energy flow in real time, adapting to fluctuations in energy sources without causing failures in the grid. Most existing systems rely on fixed input-output ratios, but my model adapts to the environment. Whether it's solar, wind, or geothermal, it adjusts and stabilizes energy production dynamically. He clicked the button to advance the slides. Detailed graphs, equations, and simulations filled the screen in front of him, and he watched carefully as the group scanned them. There was no immediate reaction, no smiles, no nods of approval. Tarek's nerves began to rise again, but he held his ground. He couldn't afford to show weakness. He continued, outlining the specific elements of the model. He explained the adaptive mechanisms that allowed the system to accommodate shifts in energy output and the ways his approach minimized environmental impact. The technical jargon rolled off his tongue with confidence, even as his hands trembled slightly. The key to the success of this model, Tarek said, his voice growing more animated, is the way it responds in real time. Energy systems are traditionally passive. Once the grid is up and running, it's static. But in our world, we're seeing more dynamic energy sources like solar and wind. This model is designed to embrace that dynamism, making the grid far more resilient. The room remained silent as he finished his presentation, and Tarek felt the tension rise. The team from Green Tech Industries exchanged quiet glances, their expressions unreadable. He couldn't tell if they were impressed or skeptical, but there was something in the air, a sense of judgment. Finally, one of the men, a tall figure with salt and pepper hair, spoke up. His voice was low and authoritative. You're saying that this model could stabilize the grid during unexpected shifts in energy production? He asked, his tone skeptical but curious. That's a bold claim. We've seen several attempts to address grid instability, but none have been scalable. Tarek nodded, feeling the weight of the question. Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I've run simulations under a variety of conditions. The results have been promising. But of course, the next step is testing it in the real world. The woman sitting next to the tall man raised an eyebrow. What kind of real-world testing are you suggesting? We'd start small, Tarek explained. Test it on a local scale, maybe in a few communities or energy plants where we can control the variables. Once we confirm that the model can handle real-world fluctuations and stabilize energy production, we can scale it up. Another man at the table, a short, stocky figure with glasses, leaned forward. What kind of resources do you need for this? We'd need to see some hard numbers before we could even consider investing. Tarek didn't hesitate. He had already prepared for this question. We'll need funding for prototype development and testing, at least $3 million to start. But the long-term potential for cost savings and sustainability in the energy sector is huge. I believe the initial investment will pay for itself within a few years, especially once we scale up. The group was silent again, and Tarek's heart raced as they absorbed his words. He couldn't tell what they were thinking, but the quiet was almost unbearable. Pierce had told him to expect this, the silence before the judgment. Finally, the tall man spoke again. This is ambitious, he said, his tone thoughtful. But ambitious projects have a way of failing, especially when they come from young, untested minds. Why should we invest in you, Tarek? Tarek took a breath. This was the moment of truth. I'm not asking you to invest in me, he said, locking eyes with the man. I'm asking you to invest in the model. The solution I've developed could change how we think about renewable energy. If it works, it could solve problems that have plagued the industry for decades. And I'm willing to work every day, every hour, to prove it. There was a long pause as the group exchanged glances, murmurs of discussion passing between them. Tariq sat still, every muscle in his body tense. Finally, the tall man nodded slowly. "All right, Tariq," he said. "We'll give you a chance. But understand this, you'll be under a microscope. If this doesn't work, you won't get a second shot." Tariq's heart leapt in his chest. He had done it. They were on board. The road to validation had begun. "Thank you," Tariq said, his voice firm. "I won't let you down." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind for Tariq. The deal with Green Tech Industries was done. The funds were secured. They were ready to test his model. But now that everything had been put into motion, Tariq couldn't escape the nagging weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. This was no longer just about proving a theory or acing a project. This was real. Lives, industries, the future of energy, were on the line. And if his model failed in the real world, it wouldn't just be a missed opportunity, it could mean disaster. Tariq knew this would be the most challenging part of the entire journey, but he wasn't backing down. He had to get it right. The testing site was located about 2 hours outside of the city, in an old industrial complex that had been converted into a renewable energy test facility. The place was buzzing with activity when Tariq arrived. A few engineers were already setting up equipment, adjusting cables, and running preliminary checks on the system. Professor Pierce, who had become his most trusted advisor, was there as well, overseeing the entire operation. Tariq's nerves threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was his chance to prove everything he had worked for. He had already reviewed the data over and over, making sure there were no hidden flaws or inconsistencies. The simulations had been perfect. Now, it was time to see if the real-world application would hold up. "Tariq!" Pierce called out, waving him over as he walked across the facility. Tariq smiled and made his way toward him, trying to mask the anxiety he felt. "Everything looks good so far?" Tariq asked, his voice tight but hopeful. "It's all coming together," Pierce replied, his expression calm, yet there was a sharpness in his eyes. Tariq could tell that even the professor was feeling the pressure. "We've got the systems in place. We're just waiting for the green light to start testing the model with live energy sources." They stood together, watching as the engineers made final adjustments to the equipment. Tariq's heart was racing. He could hear the hum of machines around him, the buzz of nervous chatter in the air, and yet all of it felt distant. The only thing that mattered was the test, the results. "Tariq," Pierce said, turning to him with a knowing look. "We both know how high the stakes are here. But remember, don't let the pressure distract you. You've done the work. The math is solid. This is just the next step." Tariq nodded, though his mind was swirling. He wasn't about to let it distract him. He had come too far. Suddenly, one of the engineers walked over to them, holding a clipboard in his hands. "Everything's ready," the engineer said. "We're good to go. We just need you to give the final okay to start the system." Tariq took a deep breath. This was the moment. He looked around, his gaze locking with Pierce's for a split second before turning to the engineer. "Start the test," Tariq said, his voice steady but laced with tension. The engineer nodded and walked back to the control panel. Tariq's fingers twitched, but he resisted the urge to check and double-check everything. He had done that 1,000 times over the past few days. He trusted his calculations. He trusted the model. The countdown began. The room fell silent as everyone gathered around the monitors, watching the system slowly come to life. Tariq's eyes remained glued to the screen as the energy grid started humming, the model's algorithm coming online, adjusting to the inputs and outputs as it should. "System stable," the lead engineer said after a few moments, his voice cutting through the tension in the air. "No issues detected." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the group, but Tariq wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. This was only the beginning. Now came the real test, the fluctuations. For the next several hours, they ran the system through every scenario Tarek had modeled. The energy inputs were varied, intentionally fluctuating, mimicking real-world conditions. Solar output was reduced, wind speeds were altered, and even geothermal heat levels fluctuated as the system had to adapt. Tarek watched closely, tracking every variable, every data point that appeared on the screen. His eyes darted between the live data and the model's response, each line of the graph representing a delicate balancing act. At first, everything went smoothly. The system adjusted seamlessly to each change. Tarek felt the weight on his shoulders ease, just a little. But then, something unexpected happened. The wind input spiked, and with it, the system's response began to lag. Tarek's stomach dropped. The graphs began to flatten, the system failing to stabilize as quickly as it should. Panic bubbled up inside him, but he fought to keep his composure. "Hold on," Tarek muttered under his breath, adjusting his glasses. He typed furiously, checking the model's internal parameters. The engineers around him were starting to murmur nervously. "Professor, something's wrong," Tarek said, glancing over at Pierce, who had been standing off to the side, observing the whole thing. "I think there's a misalignment between the wind data and the response rate. The model's compensating too slowly." Pierce didn't hesitate. "Increase the system's tolerance by 10%. See if that resolves it." Tarek nodded quickly, inputting the change. His fingers flew over the keyboard, heart pounding in his chest. The numbers on the screen started to shift. Slowly, the system's response time improved. It was still lagging, but the improvement was significant. Tarek watched closely, hoping the adjustments would be enough to stabilize the system. Another few minutes passed, and then, success. The graphs steadied. The system stabilized, adapting to the sudden surge in wind energy, just as it was designed to do. "Success," Tarek muttered to himself, barely believing the words. The system had passed the test. It wasn't flawless, but it had worked. It had adjusted. It had done exactly what he promised. The engineers were already starting to congratulate each other, their relief palpable. Pierce stepped up beside Tarek, his face breaking into a rare smile. "You did it," Pierce said, clapping him on the back. "It's not perfect, but this is a huge step forward. We can fine-tune the model, but the core concept is sound." Tarek exhaled deeply, feeling the weight that had been crushing his chest lift just a little. It wasn't over. There were still adjustments to make, still tests to run, but the first hurdle had been cleared. Tarek turned to the team of engineers, offering a smile. "Thank you for your patience," he said, his voice still a little shaky but filled with gratitude. "We're not done yet. But this is just the beginning." The team nodded, some giving him thumbs up as they began to pack up the equipment. Pierce looked over at him, his eyes gleaming. "Ready for the next round?" Tarek looked back at the data, the sense of achievement filling him with new resolve. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. And just like that, they were off to the next phase. This wasn't just about Tarek anymore. This was about something far bigger. The world had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. The next few days passed in a blur of data, analysis, and small victories. Tarek's mind was constantly racing as he continued to refine the system, working with the engineers and Professor Pierce to optimize the model's performance. They had already made some progress since the first test, but Tarek knew they were far from finished. The goal was clear now: they needed to prove that the model could handle any fluctuation, in any condition, under any scenario. The excitement of the successful test was still fresh, but the pressure had only increased. Green Tech Industries had been watching closely. Tarek was constantly in contact with their team, sending them reports and updates on every little change they made. The company had already shown interest, but it was clear that they weren't going to move forward until Tarek and his team could demonstrate consistent results. Tarek sat at the control center late one evening, reviewing the data from the latest round of tests. The screen in front of him was filled with numbers, graphs, and simulations. Despite his exhaustion, he remained focused. Each line of data represented a potential breakthrough or a looming failure, and Tarek couldn't afford to miss a single detail. "Tarek," Professor Pierce said, interrupting his concentration. He had come into the control center, coffee cup in hand. "I think we need to sit down and go over the next steps. Green Tech is pushing for an update. They want to see more data." Tarek glanced up, momentarily startled by the professor's presence. He'd been so consumed by the work that he hadn't noticed how late it was getting. "Of course," Tarek replied, rubbing his eyes. "I just finished reviewing the most recent tests. We've made some improvements, but there's still work to be done." Pierce nodded, his eyes scanning the room as he approached the desk. "You're doing great, Tarek. But we need to get more specific about the results. We've already shown them the potential, now we need to prove the system's reliability. That's the key." Tarek nodded, understanding what Pierce meant. The early success had been encouraging, but now they needed to take things to the next level. They had to demonstrate that the model wasn't just a one-time success, it had to work every time, no matter the challenge. They sat down together at the table, the quiet hum of the computers filling the space around them. Pierce opened his laptop and started pulling up the latest results. "So, here's what we've got," Pierce began. "The system is stabilizing energy flow well in most situations, but we still have some gaps when it comes to extreme fluctuations. We need to test that specifically." Tarek leaned forward, his fingers itching to dive back into the numbers. "We're pushing the boundaries, but I think if we adjust the predictive algorithms, we can increase the system's responsiveness to extreme events. It's about giving it a little more flexibility. If the model can react faster to unpredicted changes, it'll stabilize better." Pierce considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That's a solid idea. But we also need to prepare for the worst-case scenarios. If Green Tech is going to take us seriously, they need to see that we can handle disruptions on a grand scale." Tarek paused, staring at the data in front of him. Pierce was right. The last thing they needed was to get comfortable. They couldn't afford to assume anything would work just because the system had performed well under controlled conditions. The real world was unpredictable, and the model had to be ready for anything. "I'll adjust the model tonight," Tarek said, standing up. "We'll run the next batch of tests first thing in the morning. I'll make sure we push it to the limit." The next morning, Tarek arrived at the facility with a sense of determination that had been building inside him for days. He had stayed up most of the night refining the model, tweaking the algorithms, and preparing for the next round of tests. This was the moment when he had to prove that the system was more than just a theoretical success, it had to be practical, reliable, and ready for the real world. The team was already gathered in the control center when Tarek walked in. Pierce was there, along with a few engineers who had been working on the project for years. They greeted him with nods and murmurs of encouragement, but Tarek could feel the weight of their expectations. Everyone was waiting on him now. Tarek took a deep breath and walked over to the main console. The engineers were preparing the equipment for the new tests. This time, they were going to simulate larger disruptions in the grid, things like power plant failures, sudden drops in solar input, and even grid overloads. These were the kinds of extreme conditions that would truly test the limits of the model. "All right," Tarek said, taking his place at the console. "Let's push this system to its limit. We need to see how it performs under extreme pressure." The engineers started typing commands into the system, preparing for the simulations. Tarek felt his pulse quicken as he watched the data start to come in. The model was being fed with a series of complex, unpredictable energy inputs. Tarek's fingers hovered over the keyboard as the first round of tests began. The first test was a simulation of a massive energy demand spike, followed by a sudden drop in solar input. The system had to quickly respond to both changes simultaneously. Tarek watched intently, his eyes scanning the data as it flowed across the screen. At first, the system seemed to be struggling. The grid was failing to stabilize properly, and Tariq's heart sank as the data reflected instability. The lines on the graph wavered erratically, and Tariq cursed under his breath. This was not what he had hoped for. "Adjust the parameters," Tariq ordered, his voice sharp. He wasn't about to let the system fail without figuring out why. "Increase the predictive tolerance and smooth out the fluctuations. I think it's reacting too aggressively." The engineers quickly made the adjustments, and the system continued to run. The data shifted as the model adapted, slowly starting to stabilize. Tariq's eyes narrowed as the graphs began to show improvement. The system was responding, but it was still far from perfect. "Better, but not enough," Tariq muttered. He could feel the pressure mounting. This test was critical, and he needed to get it right. He could already picture the skeptical looks from green tech executives if they saw these results. Another round of adjustments. Tariq felt like he was running out of time. He couldn't keep adjusting parameters forever. The model needed to work on its own merit. An hour passed, and after several more attempts, something finally clicked. The system's response was smoother, more stable. Tariq could see the model handling the disruptions more effectively, even as the inputs grew more volatile. "Okay," Tariq said, exhaling slowly. "I think we're close now. Let's run the final tests." The last round was the most difficult yet, simulating an entire regional power outage caused by a natural disaster. The energy inputs were unpredictable, and the system was forced to deal with multiple variables at once. Tariq stood back, watching in silence as the data came in. The system struggled at first, but then it began to adapt, stabilizing the grid in a way Tariq hadn't expected. The model was beginning to show its true potential: real-time adaptation, rapid response to changes, and a robust handling of extreme conditions. Tariq allowed himself a small smile. "I think we've done it," Tariq said, turning to Pierce. "It's not perfect, but it's the closest we've come. This is the breakthrough we needed." Pierce smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "This is it, Tariq. You've proven the model works." Tariq nodded, but his mind was already racing. This was just the first of many tests. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Tariq felt a surge of hope. After a few more days of testing, Tariq could finally breathe a little easier. The system was showing promise, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. Green tech industries had been receiving regular updates on the progress, and their interest was growing more serious. Tariq could feel the pressure building again. Now, it wasn't just about proving the model worked in the lab. It was about turning it into a real-world solution. The stakes were much higher now, and the scrutiny from green tech would be intense. But Tariq was ready. He knew how much was riding on this, how much his research had the potential to change the world. Every late night, every sacrifice, it was all leading up to this moment. He had spent years building the foundation, and now it was time to make it count. Tariq stood in front of the whiteboard in the control center, marker in hand. The team had gathered to discuss their next steps. Even though they had made significant strides, Tariq knew that there were still challenges ahead. Green Tech's executives were no longer just interested in a theoretical application, they wanted results, data they could trust, and a system that could scale. "All right," Tariq said, drawing a large circle on the board, splitting it into sections. "We've proven that the model can handle fluctuations, but we still need to test scalability. We need to see if it can handle not just isolated regions but entire states or even multiple cities. If we can't scale it, then we haven't really solved anything." Professor Pierce nodded in agreement, his face serious. "That's true. This is where it gets tricky. Once we increase the grid size, the complexity of the problem grows exponentially. We need to be sure the system can manage that kind of load." Tariq looked at the team, his gaze sweeping over their faces. They were all dedicated to this project, just as he was, but even they seemed to feel the enormity of what they were about to tackle. This wasn't just about energy flow anymore, it was about transforming the future of power generation and distribution. We'll start by modeling the regional grid systems. Test how the model can distribute energy across multiple sources and maintain stability. We need to find the threshold before things start to break down, Tarek said, turning to the screen and typing out their plan. He took a deep breath and looked at the team again. But we can't afford to waste time. Green Tech is going to want updates sooner rather than later, and we can't show them anything half done. It has to be perfect. There was a brief silence before one of the engineers, Michael, spoke up. You know they're going to push us hard, right? They want numbers. Real-world applications. They don't have time for simulations anymore. Tarek nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. I know. But the numbers won't mean anything if we can't deliver the product. We have to get the real-world testing right, and we need to do it fast. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. The team worked tirelessly, testing new variables and scaling up the model. Tarek found himself buried in equations, simulations, and calculations, as the complexity of the system grew. There were days when he felt overwhelmed, questioning whether they could handle everything Green Tech was asking for. But each time the doubt crept in, Tarek reminded himself why he was doing this. He wasn't just solving a technical problem, he was on the verge of changing the future. The real-world testing was scheduled for the following week. They had managed to scale the model to the point where they could simulate a regional grid, using a combination of real-time data from various sources and their own predictive algorithms. Tarek knew this was their make-or-break moment. If this test succeeded, it would demonstrate that their model could handle not just fluctuations, but large-scale disruptions in power generation. If it failed, everything would fall apart. On the day of the test, the team gathered at the control center early. Tarek felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was it, the final test before presenting the model to Green Tech's executives. There was no room for error. All right, Tarek said, his voice steady despite the tension he felt. We've done all the preparation we can. Let's run the simulation and see what happens. The room went quiet as the team began inputting the final parameters. Tarek stood by the monitor, watching the numbers and graphs as they began to populate the screen. They were simulating a major power outage caused by a combination of weather events and grid overload, with multiple regions affected. Tarek's fingers twitched nervously as the system came to life. The simulation started, and the first few moments were promising. The model adapted to the changes, responding to the fluctuations in real time. Tarek held his breath, waiting for the first signs of trouble. The system began to stabilize, but then, just as they expected, a new problem emerged. The power spike from the east grid is too high, one of the engineers, Karen, called out, her voice tense. The system is lagging on the response time. Tarek's mind raced. This wasn't good. They had accounted for power spikes, but this one was larger than expected. If they didn't fix it quickly, the entire simulation would collapse. Adjust the tolerance, Tarek said immediately, his voice urgent. Increase the upper limit on the east grid. Make it adapt faster. Karen typed in the new parameters, and Tarek held his breath. The data began to shift again. Slowly, the model responded, adjusting to the power spike. The system stabilized, just as they had hoped. Okay, Tarek said, exhaling in relief. We're back on track. Keep monitoring for any additional spikes. We can't afford another delay. For the next hour, they continued to monitor the system, making slight adjustments as needed. The simulation was running smoothly now, the model adapting to each change with minimal disruption. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the simulation ended. The room erupted in a collective sigh of relief. Success, Tarek said, barely believing it. We did it. The system is stable under extreme conditions, and we managed to scale it. Professor Pierce smiled, clapping Tarek on the back. Well done, Tarek. This is what we've been working toward. Tarek felt a rush of pride, but it was quickly replaced by the realization of what came next. They had proven the model could work. But now, it was time to present it to Green Tech. The following day, Tarek and Pierce prepared for the most important meeting of their lives. Tarek sat in front of a large whiteboard, going over the data one last time. The Green Tech executives would be there soon. He had to be ready. This is it, Tarek, Pierce said, his voice calm but with an edge of excitement. We've got the data. Now we just have to sell it. Tarek nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. He had spent years developing this model, pouring everything he had into it. But now, it wasn't just about the science. It was about presenting a vision, one that could change the way the world thought about energy. Let's do this, Tarek said, standing up straight. And with that, the final step of the journey had begun. The conference room was sterile and cold, its high-tech design a stark contrast to the chaotic whirlwind of emotions swirling inside Tarek. It was a large room, with sleek glass walls and a polished table that reflected the sharp overhead lighting. The walls were lined with screens, ready to display data and simulations. Tarek stood near one of the monitors, adjusting his tie nervously. Professor Pierce sat across from him, looking as composed as ever, his glasses perched delicately on his nose. The moment had arrived. The Green Tech executives were on their way, and Tarek could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him like a physical force. This wasn't just another classroom presentation or a pitch to a professor. This was real. This was a life-changing opportunity, not just for him, but for the world. Tarek tried to focus, taking slow, steady breaths. He knew the numbers, the system, and its potential for change. The hard part was translating that knowledge into something that would convince the corporate giants across the table that they were standing on the edge of a revolution. As the door opened, Tarek straightened up. 3 executives walked in, 2 men and a woman, dressed in dark suits, their faces businesslike, but with a hint of curiosity. They exchanged brief greetings, each of them offering a firm handshake. Tarek did his best to maintain his composure, shaking their hands in turn. Mr. Johnson, Professor Pierce, it's a pleasure, said the woman in the group, her voice professional but warm. Her name was Lauren, and she appeared to be the lead executive in charge of the project. She had a no-nonsense air about her, but Tarek could tell she was open-minded. We've been following your progress, and we're eager to hear more. Tarek nodded, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our work today. We're confident that the system we've developed will change the future of energy distribution. Lauren smiled slightly, then motioned for everyone to sit down. Tarek and Pierce took their seats, and the executives settled in across from them. Tarek clicked a button on the console, and the large screen behind him lit up with data, graphs, flowcharts, and simulations from their latest tests. Let's start with the basics, Tarek said, his voice steady now. He could feel the familiar rhythm of the presentation coming back. This model addresses one of the biggest challenges in modern energy distribution, stabilizing power grids in real time, particularly during times of sudden fluctuations, power outages, or disruptions. We've taken existing methods to the next level by incorporating real-time predictive algorithms and an adaptive response system. Lauren raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Predictive algorithms, she asked. You're claiming that the system can anticipate fluctuations before they occur? Tarek nodded. Exactly. Most current systems are reactive, which means they only respond after the problem happens. Our system, however, uses real-time data to predict potential disruptions in the grid and adjusts the energy flow accordingly, before the disruption hits. We've modeled this using data from actual grids, and the results have been groundbreaking. He clicked to the next slide, showing a simulation of a power outage caused by a storm. The graphs showed how the system adapted in real time, stabilizing the grid and mitigating the outage's effects within minutes. The model has already been tested on smaller grids, but we've also scaled it to handle regional and even statewide grids, Tariq continued. And we've done so under extreme conditions, massive power spikes, weather-related disruptions, and grid overloads. Lauren leaned forward, clearly impressed. So, you've demonstrated that the system can work under extreme pressure? Exactly, Pierce chimed in. We ran simulations that included everything from weather-related spikes to large-scale regional power failures. The system handled everything with minimal disruption and maintained stability across multiple regions. Tariq could see the executives exchanging looks, but they hadn't said anything yet. He pressed on, knowing that this was the part of the pitch that would either make or break their chances. The key here is scalability, Tariq said. Most systems simply aren't designed to handle the complexities of large, interconnected grids, especially when you consider things like renewable energy sources that are more unpredictable. Our model doesn't just work in ideal conditions, it adapts to chaos. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. He could feel the pressure mounting again, but he kept his cool. This was his moment to prove that everything he had worked for was not just a dream, but a tangible, viable solution. We're not just building a system to handle current grid problems. We're building a future-proof system that can grow with the grid and adapt to new challenges as they arise, Tariq continued. With green tech as resources and reach, we believe we can deploy this technology on a global scale. Think of the possibilities: smarter, more resilient grids that can handle the demands of the 21st century. The room was silent for a moment, as the executives absorbed the information. Tariq took another breath, hoping he had conveyed the scope of what they had achieved. This wasn't just about the model's technical success, it was about the long-term impact it could have on the energy industry, and the world at large. Lauren broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. This is impressive, Tariq. It's clear you've put a lot of work into this, and the technology seems promising. But there's one question we still need to answer. Tariq nodded, his heart rate quickening. What's that? Lauren leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. How do you plan to scale this up? And more importantly, how do you plan to integrate it with the existing infrastructure? Tariq had anticipated this question, and he was ready. He motioned to the screen, where a detailed plan for scaling the system appeared. We've already laid out the integration process. Our model uses open-source architecture, meaning it can work with any existing infrastructure. We've worked closely with engineers to ensure it's adaptable to different grid configurations, and it doesn't require major overhauls to current systems. In fact, one of the advantages is that it can be implemented gradually, so cities and regions can adopt it incrementally. Pierce added, the integration process has been mapped out with clear benchmarks for every phase, including testing, deployment, and optimization. We've also taken into account potential challenges such as data security and regulatory hurdles. Lauren nodded slowly, considering the proposal. Tariq held his breath, waiting for her response. After a long pause, she smiled slightly. I'll admit, I'm impressed. It's rare to see a proposal with this level of detail and vision. You've clearly thought through the technical aspects. But I want to hear from you, Tariq. How confident are you that this will work on a national scale? Tariq's mind raced. This was the moment when everything could either fall into place or collapse. He remembered the late nights, the frustrations, and the breakthroughs. He thought about all the people who had doubted him, and all the moments he'd questioned whether he could really make this work. But then, he thought about the students he'd mentored at the community center, the family that had always supported him, and the future he could help build with this technology. He thought about the world, how it could be different if this system could work. And, most importantly, he thought about how much he had sacrificed to get here. I'm confident, Tariq said, his voice steady, unwavering. I've seen the data, I've tested the system, and I know the impact it can have. I believe in this technology. More than that, I believe in the future we're building. I'm ready to see it change the world. The room was silent for a long moment. Tariq held his breath, waiting for the verdict. Finally, Lauren spoke. "All right, Tarek. We'll take this to the next level. We're going to bring this to our board and begin discussions about a pilot program. If everything checks out, we'll start the process of scaling this up." Tarek felt a rush of relief, followed by an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. They had made it. The road ahead was still long, but this was a victory. "Thank you," Tarek said, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "This is just the beginning." It was the kind of moment that made all the hard work feel worth it. Tarek sat in the bustling cafe near the university campus, his phone in his hand, staring at the email that had just landed in his inbox. He read it again, just to be sure. Subject: Green Tech Industries, Pilot Program Approval. Dear Tarek, we are pleased to inform you that your proposal for the pilot program has been approved. We are moving forward with the next phase of testing and integration, starting with a partnership with your team. We will be in touch to arrange the logistics and finalize the schedule. We look forward to working with you. Sincerely, Lauren Hargrave, Green Tech Industries. Tarek couldn't contain the smile that spread across his face. After months of preparation, late nights, and countless hurdles, they had done it. Green Tech was moving forward with their pilot program. This was it, the first step towards something that could change the energy landscape forever. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just about the approval. It was about the potential, the chance to implement the system on a real grid, to see how it performed in the field, to make sure that everything they had worked for could stand up to the chaos of the real world. Tarek tapped the screen, calling up Professor Pierce's contact. His phone rang once before Pierce's familiar voice came through. "Tarek. What's the good news?" Pierce said, his voice filled with anticipation. "We got it," Tarek said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "Green Tech approved the pilot program. We're officially moving forward." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a triumphant laugh from Pierce. "That's incredible. I knew you had it in you. This is going to be huge." Tarek's heart raced with pride and excitement, but a part of him couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping in. He had always known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the magnitude of what lay ahead began to sink in. They weren't just testing theories anymore, they were about to roll out a system on a scale that could impact millions of people. It wasn't just about getting the numbers right. It was about proving that their technology could live up to its promise in real-life conditions. "I can't believe it's finally happening," Tarek said, a laugh escaping him. "But now the real work starts, right?" Pierce's voice was calm but full of resolve. "You bet it does. This pilot program is just the beginning. But I know you and your team are more than ready for it. Just make sure you stay focused. This is where all the pieces come together." Tarek nodded, even though Pierce couldn't see it. "I'll stay focused. Let's make sure we don't let up now." The next few weeks were a blur. Tarek and his team dove headfirst into the preparations for the pilot program, which was slated to begin in a mid-sized city on the outskirts of the state. Green Tech had arranged for them to work alongside local utilities to implement their system into the existing infrastructure. Tarek had to balance endless meetings with Green Tech executives, testing, adjustments, and organizing logistics. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The initial deployment was smooth, and Tarek watched with pride as his model was integrated into the grid. There were some technical glitches, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with some quick adjustments. The system adapted as expected, stabilizing the grid even when the city experienced several power fluctuations due to a sudden heatwave. But then, things started to get complicated. It was a Thursday afternoon when the first real test hit. Tarek was sitting in the monitoring center, his eyes glued to the screen as the system processed data from across the grid. The temperature had spiked, causing a heavy demand for electricity, and Tarek could see the system's response time starting to slow down. "We're seeing a delay," one of the engineers, Michael, said, his voice tight with concern. The model's response time is longer than expected. It's not handling the load well. Tariq's pulse quickened. This wasn't what he had anticipated. The system had been designed to handle such spikes. The algorithm should have adapted much faster. Run a diagnostic, Tariq ordered, standing up and walking over to Michael's station. We need to find out what's causing the lag. Michael began typing furiously, pulling up various metrics and charts. Tariq watched the screen, trying to keep his breathing steady. His mind raced through potential causes. Was it a flaw in the model? A mistake in the integration process? Something else? Minutes passed, but the diagnosis didn't provide the answers he needed. The lag wasn't just a small glitch, it was starting to destabilize the grid. The system had fallen behind, and it was causing cascading issues. This isn't good, Tariq muttered under his breath, trying to suppress the panic that threatened to rise in his chest. If they couldn't fix this, the pilot program could be a disaster. We need to isolate the issue, Professor Pierce's voice crackled through the comm system. Tariq, what's happening on your end? We're seeing delays in response times, Tariq explained, trying to keep his tone calm. The system can't handle the load properly. It's like there's a bottleneck somewhere. I'm running diagnostics, but I don't have an answer yet. Pierce was quiet for a moment before responding. You're on the right track. Check the predictive algorithm, it might be miscalculating the necessary power distribution. If the algorithm can't predict demand fast enough, it'll cause a delay in response. Tariq quickly keyed in the adjustment, revisiting the model's predictive layers. His hands were shaking as he made the changes, trying to think through the solution methodically. After a few tense minutes, the system began to adjust. Tariq held his breath, watching the data. Slowly, the system started responding to the demand more efficiently. The lag reduced, and the grid began to stabilize again. Tariq exhaled in relief, but his heart was still racing. That was too close, Michael said, glancing over at Tariq. But we've got it under control for now. Tariq nodded, though his mind was still racing. We need to figure out why that happened before it gets worse. If we're going to scale this, we can't afford to make these kinds of mistakes. The rest of the day was spent running tests and tweaking the system, making sure that they could adapt quickly to unforeseen demands. The team managed to get the system back on track, but Tariq knew this was just a small hiccup in what was going to be a long and difficult road. By the end of the week, the system was running more smoothly, but Tariq couldn't shake the feeling that they were just scratching the surface. They had proven the model worked under normal conditions, but this was different. This was real-world pressure. As he sat back in the control room, watching the system operate at full capacity, Tariq's mind wandered. He had solved many problems in his life, but this was the biggest challenge of them all. He wasn't just fixing a problem. He was changing the way the world would look at energy. And that, he realized, was something worth fighting for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first few months of the pilot program passed in a blur of technical adjustments, late-night coding sessions, and meetings with Green Tech. Tariq had hardly found time to breathe, let alone enjoy the small victories that came with seeing his system function in real-world conditions. The constant pressure to refine, optimize, and scale the project loomed over him like a storm cloud, always threatening to break. While the system was working, mostly, there were still hiccups. Small, yet crucial moments that raised doubts in Tariq's mind. Power surges, grid instability during unanticipated weather changes, and glitches in the predictive algorithms that he had thought were ironclad. Each time they solved one problem, another seemed to emerge, like a puzzle that was never quite finished. It was during one of these particularly taxing days that Tariq found himself in a meeting with Lauren Hargrave, the Green Tech executive who had been overseeing the project. Sitting across from her in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, Tariq could feel the weight of her gaze on him, as though she were trying to see into his very soul. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Tariq," Lauren began, her voice calm but sharp. "The feedback from our test regions isn't as favorable as we'd hoped. There are issues with grid instability when demand spikes beyond a certain threshold. It's causing delays, and if we don't fix it soon, this pilot will end up being a failure." Tariq felt the heat rise to his face, though he tried to remain composed. "I understand, Lauren. We're already working on a patch to improve the predictive model's accuracy. The system can handle a wide range of fluctuations, but we haven't accounted for some of the more extreme spikes." Lauren leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. "I get it, Tariq. But you have to understand, we don't have much more time. The board's already talking about pulling the plug. They're not convinced the system is ready for national deployment. They want results, not promises." Tariq's stomach tightened. He had always known that a single misstep could derail everything, but hearing Lauren's words made the stakes feel even higher. This wasn't just about fixing an algorithm or tweaking a model. This was his chance to prove to the world, especially to himself, that he could be the one to solve this global problem. "We're going to make this work," Tariq said, his voice firm. "I've been through challenges before, and we've always found a way. Give us another month. Just one more month to refine the system." Lauren paused, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. She was silent for several long moments, and Tariq held his breath, praying for a second chance. Finally, she spoke. "All right. One more month. But after that, if the results aren't there, we're pulling out." Tariq nodded, his mind already racing with solutions. He wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away, not after everything he'd been through. He had spent too much time working on this project to watch it all come crashing down now. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Tariq and his team worked around the clock, tweaking the algorithms, rerouting the data, and testing the system under every possible condition. The pressure was unbearable at times, but Tariq knew that this was his moment to prove that the work they had done was more than just theory. One afternoon, while working late at the lab, Tariq received an unexpected visitor, Professor Pierce. Tariq hadn't seen him in a few days, and it was clear that the professor was worried. "I wanted to check in," Pierce said, his voice uncharacteristically soft as he sat down beside Tariq. "I know things have been stressful lately." Tariq leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, that's an understatement. I thought we were past the worst of it, but the more we test, the more issues keep popping up. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Pierce gave him a sympathetic look. "I get it, Tariq. But remember, this is what you've been building towards your whole life. You've always believed in your ability to find solutions. This is just another problem you're solving. It's tough, but you've got this." Tariq didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at the screen where the system's latest diagnostic reports were flashing, showing more red flags than he cared to admit. "What if it's not enough?" Tariq asked quietly. "What if this system, no matter how much we improve it, isn't what green tech needs? What if I've just been chasing a dream that's too big?" Pierce placed a hand on his shoulder. "The truth is, Tariq, sometimes the best solutions are the ones that take the longest to see. But you've already done more than most people could ever dream of. No one gets everything perfect the first time. The key is to keep refining, keep pushing. You've already proved that this system works in ways that others didn't think were possible. That's the heart of innovation." Tariq nodded, trying to absorb the professor's words. Pierce was right, of course. He had come too far to give up now. But it didn't change the fact that time was running out, and every new issue that arose felt like another ticking clock. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the pressure mounted. The feedback from green tech remained mixed. There were moments of success, but they were often followed by setbacks. Tariq felt like he was running in circles, desperately trying to make the system flawless, but never quite reaching perfection. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Tarek and his team were gathered in a control room, testing the system under a particularly challenging scenario, a massive, multi-state blackout. The system was designed to kick in and stabilize the grid in such an event, but Tarek had a nagging feeling that the system wasn't going to perform as well as it needed to. As the simulation began, Tarek watched the data stream across the screen. This was the ultimate test. If the system failed now, it would prove that they weren't ready for large-scale deployment. Tarek held his breath as the numbers climbed, waiting for the inevitable crash. But then, something incredible happened. The system began to adapt, its algorithms predicting the power needs with staggering accuracy. It didn't just stabilize the grid, it optimized it, rerouting energy to areas in need before the demand could even peak. The feedback loops worked seamlessly, and within minutes, the grid was back to normal. Tarek sat back in his chair, stunned. "We did it," Michael whispered from across the room. Tarek couldn't believe it. The system had passed the ultimate test. It was no longer just a collection of algorithms and data, it was something far greater. It was a living, breathing entity that could adapt and thrive in the most extreme conditions. Tarek grabbed his phone, dialing Pierce's number with shaking hands. "Professor, you need to see this. We've done it. We've solved it." As he waited for the professor to answer, Tarek realized that this moment, this breakthrough, was what he had been working towards all along. He wasn't just solving a problem. He was changing the world. The next few days were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Tarek and his team continued to monitor the system, their minds buzzing with the possibilities now that their technology had passed the ultimate test. Green Tech had scheduled another round of meetings, and the pilot program was beginning to gain traction in the media. It seemed like the tide had turned. Finally, after months of struggle, the project was poised for success. But as Tarek would soon learn, success often brings its own set of challenges. It was a chilly Tuesday morning when Tarek's phone buzzed with a notification from the system monitoring app. His heart skipped a beat. The numbers weren't right. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. He quickly tapped open the app, watching as the screen displayed red flags flashing across several regions of the grid. The predictive algorithms were showing major discrepancies. Tarek's mind raced as he analyzed the data. This wasn't a minor glitch, this was something much worse. He grabbed his jacket and headed to the lab, his mind swirling with the possibilities. Was this another spike in demand they hadn't accounted for? Had the system failed during an unexpected scenario? Or, worse yet, was there someone on the inside sabotaging the program? By the time Tarek arrived at the lab, the team was already huddled around the screens, frantically working to identify the source of the problem. "Look at this," Michael said, pointing to the screen. "The data's been manipulated. It's almost as if someone is intentionally feeding us false inputs." Tarek's pulse quickened. His mind immediately went to Green Tech. Had they been tampering with the data to justify pulling the plug on the program? Or was it something even more sinister? "Are we sure this isn't just a bug?" Tarek asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No," Michael replied, shaking his head. "This isn't a bug. Someone's been overriding our control parameters, feeding false data into the system." Tarek felt a cold chill run down his spine. This was more than a technical issue, this was an attack on everything he had worked for. "I need to speak with Lauren," Tarek said, his voice tense. "We need to figure out who's behind this before it's too late." It didn't take long for Tarek to arrange a meeting with Lauren Hargrave. She was in her office, and when Tarek walked in, he could tell she was already on edge. There was a furrow in her brow, and her hands were clasped tightly together on the desk. "What's going on, Tarek?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with concern. Tarek didn't mince words. "Someone's tampering with the system. The data's being manipulated, and if we don't find the source of the interference, we're going to lose everything we've worked for." Lauren's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing slightly. What makes you think someone's tampering with it? Could it just be another glitch? Tarek took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. It's not a glitch, Lauren. It's too specific. Too deliberate. Someone has been feeding false data into the system, and it's causing the grid to destabilize. Lauren leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Who would do something like that? And why? Tarek didn't have an immediate answer, but the question hung in the air like an invisible weight. That's what we need to figure out. If someone's sabotaging the project, it could be an inside job. It could be someone at Green Tech, or it could be someone else who wants to see us fail. Lauren's face was grim as she considered the possibility. If someone is sabotaging this, we need to act fast. I'll bring in the cybersecurity team and make sure that everything is locked down on our end. But Tarek, I need you to be careful. If this goes public and people start questioning the integrity of the pilot, it could destroy the entire project. Tarek nodded. I'll do whatever it takes to protect the system. But we need to find out who's behind this before it's too late. Tarek's mind was a whirlwind as he left Lauren's office. The idea of sabotage was almost too much to process. Who would want to see his team fail? And why now, when they were so close to success? The thought gnawed at him, and for the first time since the project had started, he felt truly vulnerable. Over the next few days, Tarek and his team worked tirelessly, trying to track down the source of the interference. They combed through every line of code, examined every access point, and reviewed every log from GreenTech's servers. But the answer remained elusive. Whoever was behind this had covered their tracks well. Then, late one night, Tarek made a breakthrough. While reviewing the system's logs from the past few weeks, he found an anomaly in the access records. There was a series of encrypted messages that had been sent to an unregistered server, one that was not part of their usual network. Tarek's heart raced as he traced the messages to a specific individual, someone he never would have suspected. It was Victor Mendoza, one of the top-level engineers at Green Tech. Tarek's breath caught in his throat. Victor had been one of the first people he had met when he joined Green Tech. A brilliant mind, no doubt, but also someone with a reputation for being ambitious and ruthless. Tarek knew that Victor had always been a little too eager to push for rapid, large-scale implementation, but he had never suspected that he might go this far. Tarek quickly reached out to Lauren. She didn't waste any time. Within hours, a team of cybersecurity specialists had locked down Victor's access, and Green Tech's legal team had started the process of investigating him. It was a delicate operation. Victor was a senior employee, and accusing him without concrete evidence could have massive repercussions. But the evidence Tarek had uncovered was damning. The encrypted messages were traced directly back to Victor's account, and the logs showed multiple instances of unauthorized access to the system's core files. Tarek felt a mixture of disbelief and anger. How could someone who had been so integral to the project betray them like this? Lauren, we need to confront him, Tarek said, his voice tight. We can't let this go on any longer. Lauren hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I agree. But this is going to be complicated. Victor's a valuable asset to the company, and if this goes public, it could ruin his career, and ours. Tarek didn't care about the consequences for Victor anymore. What mattered was the integrity of the project. What mattered was protecting the future of the technology he had worked so hard to develop. We have to stop him, Tarek said, his voice resolute. Before it's too late. The confrontation was set for the next morning. Tarek stood in the conference room, watching the door with a sense of dread. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that this was the moment everything could change. Victor walked in, his usual confident stride replaced by an air of uncertainty. Tarek could see the fear in his eyes, and for a moment, he almost felt pity for him. But that quickly faded. Tarek had spent too much time building this project to let someone like Victor tear it all down. Tarek, Victor said, his voice guarded. What's this about? I hear you've been looking into me. Tarek's eyes were cold as he met Victor's gaze. I know what you've been doing, Victor. I know you've been manipulating the system. You've been sabotaging the project. Victor's face went pale, and for the first time since Tarek had known him, he looked like a man caught in a lie. I don't know what you're talking about, Victor stammered. But Tarek wasn't buying it. I've got the evidence, Victor. I know it was you. Victor's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. But there was no way out. I did what I had to do, Victor finally said, his voice shaking. Green Tech wasn't going to give us the resources we needed to make this work. They were going to pull the plug, and I couldn't let that happen. I'm just trying to make sure this technology gets out there, even if I have to do it my way. Tarek felt his anger rise. You don't get to play with people's lives like this. You don't get to destroy everything we've built just because you think you know better. Victor looked away, his shoulders slumping. I was trying to save it. I thought this was the only way. Tarek shook his head. You thought wrong. The aftermath of confronting Victor Mendoza was a whirlwind of legal and corporate procedures that Tarek had never anticipated. The moment they'd exposed the sabotage, everything changed. Green Tech's internal investigation into Victor was swift and ruthless, and soon, the media caught wind of the story. What had been a promising, groundbreaking project now seemed tainted by scandal. Victor, once a respected engineer within Green Tech, was swiftly removed from the company. The press was unforgiving. Tarek had seen the headlines, Green Tech's brilliant engineer betrays trust in major tech scandal, and sabotage at Green Tech, who can you trust? The articles ranged from critical to sensational, and Tarek knew that the damage to the program's reputation was severe. Tarek had always known that failure was a possibility, but seeing the collapse of everything he had worked for, especially at the hands of someone he had once trusted, felt like a gut punch. His phone buzzed incessantly, emails flooded his inbox, and people from every corner of the project, from engineers to investors, demanded answers. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of questions, accusations, and uncertainty. It didn't help that Lauren had to step in to manage the fallout. Tarek could see the strain on her face whenever they spoke. She was doing her best to keep the company's board from pulling the plug on the entire project. Tarek, we need to keep our focus. We can't let the media derail this. There's still time to turn this around, Lauren had told him in a tense meeting one afternoon. But it was hard for Tarek to see how they could recover from something so devastating. Victor's sabotage had almost destroyed everything, and even though they'd fixed the immediate issues with the system, the public perception of the project was in freefall. Tarek stood in front of a whiteboard, a tired hand gripping the marker as he sketched out possible solutions to the grid instability problem. His mind, however, wasn't on the solution anymore. It had become difficult to concentrate. After all, how do you keep fighting when the odds feel insurmountable? How do you rebuild something from the ashes when it seems like the world has already written you off? I don't know if I can keep going like this, Tarek muttered to himself, his voice barely audible in the quiet lab. His hands were shaking slightly, and his mind kept replaying the moment when he had confronted Victor. The look in Victor's eyes had been one of desperation, but it wasn't just that. It was the realization that Tarek's world, his dream, was now built on the unstable foundation of betrayal. But something in Tarek's gut told him to keep pushing. He wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. He knew that he couldn't allow this betrayal to dictate the fate of the project. Not when they were so close to something extraordinary. Suddenly, the door to the lab opened. Tarek turned to see Michael standing in the doorway, a grim expression on his face. Tarek, we need to talk, Michael said, his tone serious. Tarek raised an eyebrow. What's going on? Michael stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. I've been doing some digging into the system's performance since Victor was let go. There's something off. It's not just the tampering we found. There are inconsistencies in the data that we didn't notice before. Tarek frowned. What do you mean? There's more manipulation going on than we originally thought, Michael explained, walking over to Tarek's desk and tapping a few keys on the computer. It's not just a one-off problem with Victor. There's a bigger issue in play here, something systemic. Tarek felt his chest tighten. Are you saying there's more sabotage? Michael nodded. It's not just sabotage, Tarek. It's a coordinated effort. There are multiple points of failure that someone is exploiting. We need to trace the source, but it's not easy. Whoever's doing this is good. Tarek's mind raced as he absorbed Michael's words. What do we do? If we don't stop this, we're not just going to lose the project, we're going to lose everything we've built. Michael looked up from the screen, his eyes locked on Tarek's. I think it's time we start looking at the bigger picture. Whoever's behind this isn't just trying to undermine the system, they're trying to destroy the whole initiative. We need to figure out who's really behind this before it's too late. For the next several days, Tarek and Michael worked around the clock to investigate the new lead. They dug through data logs, tracking down anomalies and irregularities that pointed to something far larger than they had anticipated. Whoever was behind the sabotage wasn't just interested in the technical failure of the system. They were trying to bring down the entire project, potentially for financial gain. Tarek had always believed in the purity of innovation. He thought that technology, when used for good, could change the world. But now, he realized that there were darker forces at play, forces that were more interested in control, profit, and power than in the betterment of society. I think I found something, Michael said one night, his voice filled with tension. Tarek rushed over to Michael's desk, his heart pounding. On the screen was a list of transactions and encrypted messages that pointed to a shadowy group of investors, people who had tried and failed to get their hands on green tech in the past. They were involved with Victor, Tarek muttered, his voice tight with disbelief. But they're not just after the system, they want to take over the entire company. Michael nodded grimly. They've been manipulating the data to cause the system to fail so they can swoop in and buy green tech at a discount. It's not about the technology. It's about control. The realization hit Tarek like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just corporate sabotage. It was a full-scale attempt to hijack a revolutionary project, to twist it into something that could make a few people very rich at the expense of progress. I won't let them win, Tarek said, his voice hardening with determination. We've come too far. We're not just going to let them tear this apart. In the days that followed, Tarek and Michael took the information they had gathered to Lauren. The weight of the situation hung over them, but Lauren's response was resolute. We're going to take this to the authorities, she said firmly. This goes beyond corporate espionage. It's illegal, and we have the evidence to prove it. We're not going down without a fight. With the help of Green Tech's legal team, Tarek's team compiled all of the information they had gathered. They went public with the investigation, revealing the network of shadowy investors who had been manipulating the system from within. The media, hungry for the truth, latched onto the story, and soon, the story of corporate sabotage was everywhere. But this time, it wasn't about failure, it was about triumph over those who sought to destroy the future. As the investigation unfolded, Tarek felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. The truth was out, and the enemy was being exposed. But there was still much work to do. The project wasn't safe yet, and the fight for its future was far from over. Tarek knew that he had to keep going. For the future of energy. For the team that had supported him. And for the world that needed their solution more than ever. As the days passed, Tarek and his team found themselves in the middle of an ongoing battle, not just against the enemies who sought to destroy green tech, but also against the massive, unrelenting pressure that came with being in the public eye. The media had been relentless, reporting on every twist and turn of the sabotage scandal. It felt as though they were always one step behind in controlling the narrative. Tarek's phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, investors, and former colleagues wanting statements or updates. Each time it buzzed, he couldn't help but feel a sinking sense of dread. He had never envisioned his work reaching the public in this way. He had always dreamed of his innovations changing the world, but not through scandal and accusations. The dream had become a nightmare, and it wasn't clear how or when it would end. Inside GreenTech's headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. The company's legal and cybersecurity teams were working tirelessly to dismantle the criminal network behind the sabotage. However, the immediate problem remained unresolved. Even with the authorities involved, Tariq and his team knew that the damage to the system had already been done. Investors were pulling out, competitors were circling like sharks, and public trust in the project was at an all-time low. Tariq knew that time was running out. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," Michael said, his voice strained as they sat in their makeshift war room, sifting through documents and data. "We've lost half of our investors, and the media is still painting this as a disaster. Even if we expose the culprits, it's going to take a long time to recover from this kind of backlash." Tariq rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of Michael's words. "We can't let this die. If we give up now, everything we've worked for is gone." "I agree," Michael replied, his tone shifting with determination. "But we need to find a way to turn the tide. We can't just keep fighting against the narrative. We need to take back control." Tariq thought for a moment, the pressure building in his chest. Then an idea began to form in his mind, something bold, something that could shift the focus away from the scandal and back onto the potential of the technology. "What if we do something unexpected?" Tariq said slowly, his voice suddenly steady. "What if we showed the world what this technology can really do? We've been on the defensive for too long. It's time we go on the offensive." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "We put the system to the test in real time," Tariq said, his eyes lighting up with renewed passion. "We invite the media, we invite the investors, everyone, show them how it works, how it can change the future of energy. We don't just sit here and wait for the storm to pass. We force the world to see the truth." It was a risky idea. But in Tariq's mind, it was the only way to regain the momentum they had lost. The technology they had developed was revolutionary. It had the potential to transform entire cities, reduce energy waste, and lower carbon footprints. But it was still largely theoretical in the eyes of the public. They needed a demonstration. They needed proof. "Are you sure we're ready?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "We're still fixing the glitches from the sabotage. If something goes wrong in front of the media—" "I know," Tariq interrupted. "But we have to take that risk. We can't afford to wait any longer." The decision was made. Within hours, Tariq and his team began preparing for the demonstration. They would showcase the system's capabilities in a live, real-world setting. If they could pull it off, it would silence the critics, reassure the investors, and show the world that GreenTech's technology was the future, not the failure it had been portrayed as. The event was scheduled for a week later, and Tariq spent every waking moment preparing for it. He knew that this was the make-or-break moment for GreenTech. The team worked late into the night, testing the system repeatedly to ensure it would hold up under scrutiny. Every line of code, every connection, every backup plan had to be flawless. It wasn't just about the technology anymore, it was about trust. Tariq knew that the public, the investors, and even his own team needed to believe in the project again. The sabotage, the betrayals, it had all made them question the system, and even themselves. This demonstration would either restore that trust or shatter it completely. The day of the demonstration arrived with an air of tense anticipation. The event was being streamed live, and the world was watching. The lab was packed with GreenTech employees, media representatives, investors, and experts in energy technology. The stage was set, and the weight of expectation was palpable. Tariq stood backstage, adjusting his jacket, his nerves tightening with each passing minute. He had never been this nervous before. The crowd wasn't just there to witness a technology, they were there to see if GreenTech was still capable of delivering on its promises. Ready? Lauren asked, appearing beside him, her face a mix of concern and determination. Tarek nodded, though his heart was racing. Let's do this. They walked onto the stage, where a large screen was set up to display the demonstration. Tarek's team was behind the scenes, running the system's algorithms and ensuring everything was functioning smoothly. As Tarek took the microphone, he looked out at the crowd. The atmosphere was heavy with doubt and curiosity. He could see it in the eyes of the investors, the reporters, and even some of his own team members. They all wanted proof. They all needed to see that the technology could work. Thank you all for being here today, Tarek began, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. This is more than just a demonstration. This is the future of energy. What we've built isn't just a solution, it's the foundation for a sustainable, efficient world. And today, you're going to see it in action. He paused, looking at the screen as the team initiated the live demonstration. Data began flowing in real time, showing how the system optimized energy usage across multiple sectors of a city. The grid fluctuated, adjusted, and balanced itself in a way that had never been seen before. As the demonstration progressed, Tarek saw the reactions of the crowd. Some looked impressed, others skeptical, but no one seemed unmoved. The system was working, and it was working flawlessly. The real-time adjustments, the predictive algorithms, the optimization, it was all running smoothly. The energy usage in the simulated city began to stabilize, reduce waste, and lower emissions. Then, as a final test, they simulated a power outage in one sector of the city. Tarek held his breath as the system immediately rerouted power, balancing the load and keeping everything operational. The crowd gasped, and for the first time since the scandal had begun, Tarek felt a flicker of hope. The demonstration ended with a round of applause, but Tarek could barely hear it over the pounding of his heart. He knew that this wasn't the end. It was just a glimpse of what green tech could accomplish. They still had a long road ahead, and there would be many more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in weeks, Tarek allowed himself to believe, truly believe, that this project had a future. As the crowd began to disperse, the media started to buzz. Interviews were conducted, and investors who had once been on the fence began to approach Tarek with renewed interest. The tide was turning, and Tarek couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. But he knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. For the first time, though, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The aftermath of the live demonstration was nothing short of extraordinary. The media had been buzzing for hours, and by the following morning, green tech was trending worldwide. The headlines were mixed, but for the first time in weeks, they were starting to shift in Tarek's favor. Some of the press had remained skeptical, but even they couldn't ignore the undeniable performance of the technology. Tarek sat in his office, scrolling through his phone, catching up on the coverage. One headline read: Green Tech's system passes crucial test, leaving doubts behind. Another, a new era of energy. Green Tech's innovative technology could change everything. And the comments under each article were buzzing with questions, praise, and speculation. Tarek had never imagined his work would generate this kind of attention, but here they were, his invention, his dream, now a topic of global conversation. Lauren stepped into the office, a triumphant smile on her face. You did it, she said, sitting across from him. The media is finally starting to turn around. Investors are calling again, and the skeptics are backing off. Tarek leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The stress of the past few weeks had taken its toll. I didn't do it. We did it. You, Michael, everyone in this company. It was a team effort. Lauren smiled, but there was still a hint of tension in her expression. True. But the hard part isn't over. The real challenge is keeping the momentum going. The investors who pulled out. They're going to want to see something concrete before they come back in. And there are still some serious questions about the sabotage. People won't forget that easily. Tarek nodded. He knew Lauren was right. The demonstration had been a crucial step, but it was just the beginning. Green Tech had taken a public beating, and while the demonstration had given them a brief reprieve, there were still many battles to fight. "I'm not worried about the sabotage anymore," Tarek said, his voice steady. "We have the evidence. We've already taken it to the authorities. Victor's gone, and the people behind him will be held accountable. What I'm more concerned about is proving that we can make this technology scalable. We've shown it works in a small-scale demo, but now we have to make it work in real cities, with real infrastructure." Lauren's smile faded as she nodded. "Exactly. The real test is going to be showing that the system can handle the complexities of a real-world application. The next step is critical." In the days that followed, Tarek threw himself into the work. There was no time to rest on their laurels. The demonstration had shown the world what green tech was capable of, but the company now had to prove that it could deliver on that promise. The first step was securing more funding to move forward, and the second step was scaling the technology in a way that would allow them to implement it on a much larger scale. Tarek's office became a command center. He and Lauren worked around the clock, drafting proposals, reaching out to potential investors, and coordinating with engineers to continue refining the system. They were already making plans for a full-scale pilot project in a mid-sized city that had shown interest in implementing green tech as technology. Michael, too, was working overtime, fine-tuning the system's software to handle the increased demands of a full-scale test. The system had already proven its ability to balance energy usage in a small test environment, but the real challenge would be applying it to the grid of a real city. This meant not only making the software more efficient but also ensuring that the system could handle thousands of variables in real time without crashing. Every day, the pressure mounted. Tarek spent hours in meetings with engineers, investors, and legal teams. The media continued to hound him, and the investor calls, though fewer than they'd been after the scandal broke, still came in with their own set of questions. As much as he wanted to focus on the technical side of things, Tarek knew that he had to keep his eye on the bigger picture. The success of green tech wasn't just about the technology, it was about convincing the world that this was the future of energy. And then, just as things seemed to be stabilizing, Tarek received a call that would shake everything he thought he knew. It was late in the evening when his phone rang, the number unfamiliar. Tarek hesitated, then answered. "This is Tarek Johnson," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. "Tarek, it's Greg Reynolds," came the voice on the other end. Tarek's mind raced. Greg Reynolds. The name was familiar, but it took him a moment to place it. Greg Reynolds. The investor? Tarek asked, suddenly alert. "Yes," Greg said. "I know we've had our differences in the past, but I've been following what you've been doing with green tech, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. I think you've got something special here." Tarek's pulse quickened. Greg Reynolds was one of the more prominent venture capitalists in the energy sector. His firm had turned down green tech several times before, and his influence had been a significant roadblock in securing funding in the early days. But now, after everything they'd been through, he was calling. "I appreciate that," Tarek said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "What can I do for you, Greg?" "I'm calling to offer you an opportunity," Greg said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I know things have been rough with the sabotage and the media storm, but I think you've turned a corner. I've got a network of investors who are willing to back your project, on one condition." Tarek raised an eyebrow. "What's the condition?" "You let me and my team come in as partners," Greg said, matter-of-factly. "We want a significant stake in the company, and we want a say in how things move forward." Tarek paused, considering the offer. This could be the break they needed, the funding that could take green tech to the next level. But something in his gut told him to be cautious. "I'll need to think about it," Tarek said carefully. "I don't make decisions like that on the spot." Greg laughed. "Fair enough. Take your time. But know that this could be the opportunity that gets you across the finish line. I'll give you a few days to think it over. As the call ended, Tarek sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He knew the pressure to take the deal would be immense. But could he really trust Greg Reynolds? And more importantly, could he trust his team to maintain control of GreenTech's vision if they brought in someone like Greg? He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen in front of him. The future of GreenTech was hanging in the balance, and the choice he made in the next few days could change everything. Tarek barely slept that night. The conversation with Greg Reynolds replayed in his mind over and over. On one hand, the offer was everything they needed: investment, exposure, a network of industry connections that could take GreenTech to unimaginable heights. But on the other hand, it was a gamble. Greg Reynolds was not known for being patient or cooperative, and Tarek had learned the hard way that partnerships in the tech world could be more like traps than opportunities. By the time morning came, Tarek knew he couldn't make the decision alone. He had to talk it over with his team, his real team, the ones who had been there from the very beginning. They needed to weigh the pros and cons together. GreenTech had come this far because of the trust they shared, and he wasn't about to jeopardize that for a quick fix. Lauren was the first person he called. "Morning, Tarek. What's up?" Her voice was familiar, warm, but there was an undercurrent of exhaustion that betrayed how much work she'd been putting in. "I need to talk to you about something," he replied, the weight of the decision pulling at him. "It's important. Can you meet me in the office?" "Sure, I'll be there in 30. Tarek hung up the phone, his stomach twisted with uncertainty. This was no longer just about technology or solving an energy crisis, it was about preserving the very soul of GreenTech. He wasn't just protecting a product anymore. He was protecting a vision. Lauren arrived at the office soon after, looking as though she hadn't slept in days. The dark circles under her eyes were a testament to the amount of time she'd spent pushing the company forward. "All right, what's going on?" Lauren asked as she sat down in the chair across from him. Tarek exhaled slowly, then explained Greg Reynolds' offer. The investment, the opportunity, the catch. He laid it all out. Greg's condition was clear. They would take a significant stake in the company, which meant giving up part of GreenTech's control. The decision was a critical one. Lauren sat back, processing the information. "Let me get this straight," she said finally. "Greg Reynolds wants to come in and throw money at us, but he wants a say in how the company runs. We would have to give him a stake, and that means we lose some power in how we operate." Tarek nodded. "Exactly. And he's not exactly known for being a hands-off investor. He's a shark. If we take his money, we could have access to a huge network, new resources, and a fast track to scaling up. But, we'll lose some control over the direction of the company. And I don't know if that's a trade I'm willing to make." Lauren thought for a moment, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "This is a tough one. On one hand, it's the kind of deal that could solve all our funding problems. It could get us the resources we need to scale up faster than we ever imagined. But on the other hand, do we want to hand over some of our autonomy just to get there? Exactly. I'm not sure we can afford to lose that control. Not when everything we've built so far is based on our principles, on our vision." "I hear you. But we also have to ask ourselves how long we can keep running without the proper backing. We're stretched thin, Tarek. We're running on fumes." Tarek leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. He could see the city skyline in the distance, his city. He had always dreamed of making a difference, of changing the world with GreenTech. But the world wasn't kind to dreamers, and it was becoming more apparent every day. The world was a machine that required resources, support, and alliances. If they didn't make a deal, they risked losing everything. But if they did, they risked changing everything they had worked so hard to build. "You're right," Tarek admitted. "We can't keep going at this pace. But I don't want to sacrifice our core principles for a quick fix. What if Greg isn't the right partner? What if he just wants to take over and push us out? Lauren's face softened. We've been in the trenches together from the start, Tarek. And I know you. I know you'd never let someone take green tech in the wrong direction. But we have to be realistic too. Sometimes, you have to play the game, even if it means bending the rules a little. Tarek nodded, taking in her words. They were true. They couldn't keep running from the reality of the business world. But that didn't mean he was ready to throw in the towel either. He had fought too hard for green tech to let someone else dictate its future. What if we negotiate? Tarek said suddenly, a spark of hope igniting in his mind. What if we take some of his offer but not all of it? Maybe we can find a middle ground. Lauren's eyes brightened. Now that's an idea. You're right, there has to be a compromise. We don't have to give him the full control. We don't have to hand over the company. Exactly. We can accept the funding, but we negotiate the terms, keep the majority of control, set clear boundaries, and protect the vision we've built. Lauren smiled, the tension easing from her face. I think that's the way forward. But we'll need to get legal involved and make sure the terms are airtight. Agreed, Tarek said. I'll get Michael on it. As the day went on, Tarek felt the weight of the decision still pressing down on him. The idea of negotiating a deal that allowed them to keep control of green tech while securing the investment they needed felt like the only viable option. But it was still a risk. Greg Reynolds was a powerful figure in the industry, and it was hard to predict how far he would go to get what he wanted. Later that evening, Michael joined Tarek and Lauren in the conference room to begin drafting a counteroffer. Michael, who had been with Green Tech from the start, was the voice of reason in the group. He was cautious by nature, always thinking a few steps ahead. We'll need to make sure the terms are clear, Michael said, examining the offer. If we take his money, we have to ensure we retain the majority vote. We can't afford to let him dictate every decision. Lauren nodded. Agreed. And we should also set limits on how much influence he can have in the day-to-day operations. We'll need to safeguard our team's ability to make decisions. Tarek added, and we can't give up any intellectual property. That's the heart of green tech. Without that, we have nothing. Michael typed quickly on his laptop, outlining the key points of their counteroffer. As they discussed the finer details, the plan began to take shape. By the time the meeting ended, they had crafted an offer that, while risky, could potentially secure their future without compromising the values they held dear. The next day, Tarek dialed Greg Reynolds' number with a sense of nervous anticipation. The deal was still on the table, but now it was up to Greg to accept their terms. Greg, this is Tarek, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. We've reviewed your offer, and we're willing to accept the investment, but with some conditions. Greg's voice came through, sharp and confident. I'm listening. Tarek outlined the terms of the counteroffer. Green Tech would retain the majority control, intellectual property would remain in-house, and Greg's influence would be limited to strategic direction, not day-to-day operations. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Tarek's heart raced. Had he overplayed his hand? I see, Greg finally said, his tone unreadable. I'll review these terms with my team, and we'll get back to you. Tarek exhaled slowly, a small wave of relief washing over him. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. The ball was in Greg's court now. But Tarek knew one thing for sure, he wasn't about to give up everything they had worked for just for a shot at success. This fight was far from over. The days that followed were filled with a nerve-wracking uncertainty. Tarek couldn't shake the feeling that everything was on the line. Greg Reynolds had yet to respond to their counteroffer, and the silence was deafening. In the meantime, Green Tech's momentum was still building, but they couldn't afford to wait indefinitely. The pressure was mounting from all sides, investors, the media, and, most of all, Tarek's team. Each day felt longer than the last as they waited for a response. Tarek spent hours going over the details of the counteroffer, making sure there were no loose ends. His thoughts were constantly interrupted by the ringing of his phone or the endless stream of emails. The company was moving forward, but it was a delicate balancing act. Tarek needed the deal, but he also needed to ensure that green tech stayed true to its core values. It was during one of these long days that Tarek received the call he'd been waiting for. The number on his phone was unfamiliar, but he recognized the voice immediately. "Tarek," Greg Reynolds said, "I've had a chance to review your terms. And I have to say, I'm impressed. You're tougher than I gave you credit for." Tarek's heart skipped a beat. "I'm glad to hear that. So, what's your decision?" Greg chuckled, the sound rich with amusement. "Well, you've got yourself a deal. We'll agree to your terms. But let's be clear, this is a partnership, not a charity. You keep control, but you'll answer to me when it matters." Tarek exhaled deeply, trying to suppress his relief. It wasn't the dream scenario, but it was the best he could have hoped for. He had managed to negotiate a deal that preserved GreenTech's vision and integrity, while also securing the funding they so desperately needed. But he knew the hard work was just beginning. "Thank you, Greg," Tarek said, his voice steady. "I'll have the legal team draft up the agreement, and we can get this moving." "Good," Greg replied. "I expect results, Tarek. Don't let me down." The next few days were a blur of contracts, paperwork, and finalizing the details of the deal. Tarek, Lauren, Michael, and the legal team worked around the clock to make sure everything was in place. Once the deal was signed, it would be the moment GreenTech had been waiting for, an influx of capital, a clear path forward, and the chance to scale their technology to new heights. As the final agreement was being prepared, Tarek found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The early days of GreenTech had been filled with uncertainty and struggle. There had been times when it seemed like the whole world was against him. But now, after all the setbacks, sabotage, and near disasters, GreenTech was on the verge of becoming something much bigger than he had ever imagined. But there was still one lingering question that weighed on Tarek's mind: would Greg Reynolds truly honor the terms of the agreement? Tarek knew that the venture capitalist was ruthless, and while he had agreed to the deal, it didn't mean he would stay hands-off as promised. Tarek couldn't help but wonder whether this deal would be the salvation they needed, or the beginning of a new set of problems. The day the contract was signed, Tarek stood in his office, holding the pen in his hand. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was the moment that would change everything. Lauren was beside him, smiling with a mixture of pride and relief. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with genuine admiration. Tarek nodded but didn't speak. He was still processing everything. It felt surreal that, after all the months of uncertainty, they were finally at the precipice of success. But the question that lingered in his mind was whether success could truly be achieved on their terms, or if they were about to lose control of the very thing they had fought so hard to create. As Tarek signed the agreement, a flood of emotions hit him. The weight of responsibility. The excitement of a new chapter. The pressure to deliver on the promises they had made. But above all, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for his team, for Lauren's unwavering support, for Michael's brilliant engineering, and for the people who had believed in GreenTech from the beginning. The deal was done. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With the funding secured, Tarek and his team wasted no time. They began assembling a larger team of engineers and developers to refine the technology and get it ready for full-scale implementation. The focus now was on the pilot project in a mid-sized city that had agreed to test the system in their energy grid. Greg Reynolds, as promised, remained mostly hands-off. He attended a few meetings, voiced his opinions, and provided some strategic guidance, but for the most part, Tarek and the team had free rein. It was clear that Greg was watching closely, but as long as they delivered results, Tarek knew he could manage the partnership. GreenTech's reputation was steadily improving, and the media buzz that had initially focused on the sabotage had begun to shift. The narrative was slowly changing from skepticism to cautious optimism. Journalists who had once criticized green tech for being unproven were now writing articles about the potential of Tariq's technology to revolutionize the energy industry. As the pilot project progressed, Tariq spent most of his time on the ground, meeting with the city officials, working with the engineers, and ensuring everything was on track. The system was performing well, but there were still challenges to overcome. The energy grid in a real city was much more complex than the demo setup, and there were unforeseen obstacles. Yet, Tariq and his team persevered. Every setback was met with determination, every problem was approached with a solution-oriented mindset. As the weeks passed, the results of the pilot project began to speak for themselves. The city's energy consumption was dropping, the system was stabilizing the grid, and the efficiency of the technology was exceeding expectations. The media started to take notice again, and this time, it was with genuine interest. But even as green tech made strides in its mission to change the world, Tariq knew that the real test was still ahead of them. The stakes were higher than ever. The world was watching, and so were Greg Reynolds and the investors who had backed him. One evening, as Tariq was leaving the office, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Lauren. "Tariq, I need to talk to you. There's something you need to know about the pilot project." Tariq's heart sank as he read the message. He knew that tone all too well. Something was wrong. Tariq couldn't shake the unease in his chest as he read Lauren's message. He quickly typed a response. "What's going on? Call me." Seconds later, his phone rang. Tariq picked it up without hesitation, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Tariq," Lauren's voice came through, shaky and tight. "We've got a problem." His stomach twisted. "What kind of problem?" "There's been a breach," she said, the words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. "Someone on the team, someone we trusted, has been leaking our data to Greg Reynolds' people." The revelation hit Tariq like a punch to the gut. "What? Are you sure?" "I've seen the communications. It's coming from inside, Tariq. This isn't some accident. They've been feeding information to Reynolds' camp. Every strategic move we've made in the pilot project, every detail of the technology, all of it. It's been sent to him." Tariq's mind reeled. The team was supposed to be a tight-knit unit, a family. How could this have happened? How could someone betray them like this? "Who?" he asked, his voice low with a dangerous edge. Lauren hesitated. "I don't know yet. I'm working on it. But I'm pretty sure it's someone close to the core of the project. They knew exactly what to share, how to manipulate the situation to their advantage." Tariq felt a rush of anger flood his veins, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help anyone. "Where are you now?" he asked, taking a steadying breath. "I'm at the office," she replied. "I've pulled all the relevant files and traced the communications. We can figure out who's been behind this, but we need to act fast." Tariq's heart was hammering in his chest. This wasn't just a minor issue. This was sabotage, plain and simple. Someone had been working against them from the inside, and the consequences could be catastrophic. "I'm coming over," Tariq said, his voice firm. "We'll fix this together. Don't do anything until I get there." The office was eerily quiet when Tariq arrived. The usual buzz of activity was absent, replaced by a tense atmosphere that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Lauren was sitting at her desk, staring at her laptop screen, her expression grim. As soon as she saw Tariq, she stood up and walked over to him. "I've pulled all the logs," Lauren said, handing him her laptop. "I think I know who's behind this." Tariq scanned the screen. There, in black and white, were the communications, emails, encrypted messages, and files exchanged between someone in their company and Greg Reynolds' team. The details were shocking, and the names of those involved sent a cold chill through him. The files pointed to someone he had trusted, someone who had been with Green Tech from the start, Michael, the brilliant engineer who had helped design the core technology of the grid system. Tarek's throat went dry. Michael had been instrumental in getting green tech off the ground, and now it seemed he was the one who had betrayed them. "This can't be happening," Tarek muttered. "Michael? But he's been with us from the very beginning. He believed in the vision." Lauren nodded slowly, her eyes filled with sadness. "I don't want to believe it either, Tarek. But the evidence doesn't lie. He's been feeding them our intellectual property. Every breakthrough, every development, every piece of our work." Tarek felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. He had known Michael for years. They had been friends. How could someone he trusted so completely have done this to him? To all of them? Why would he do this? Tarek asked, his voice barely a whisper. He knew what we were trying to build. He knew the impact this could have. Lauren sighed. "I don't know. Maybe it was greed. Maybe he thought he could cash out and get a better deal. Or maybe he was under pressure from Reynolds. I don't have the answers yet." Tarek slammed his fist on the desk, frustration and anger boiling over. "This is insane. We can't let him get away with this. We have to confront him." Lauren's eyes hardened. "We will. But we need to be careful. Michael's smart. He knows how to cover his tracks. If we go in too fast, he could slip away, or worse, he could destroy any chance we have of recovering what he's taken." Tarek nodded. She was right. They couldn't let their emotions guide them. They needed to think this through carefully. "What do we do now?" Tarek asked, trying to regain some measure of control over the situation. "We need to confront him, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't tip him off," Lauren said. "I've already pulled the latest communications logs. If we can catch him in the act, if we have undeniable proof, we can bring him in and force his hand." Tarek's mind raced. "We need to make sure this doesn't get out. If Reynolds finds out we know, he'll go to great lengths to bury us." Lauren's face tightened with determination. "We'll make sure of that. I'll set up a meeting with Michael. We'll approach him cautiously, get him talking, and see if we can get him to slip up." Tarek wasn't sure if he was ready to confront Michael like this, but he knew it had to be done. His hands were shaking as he dialed Michael's number, each ring a painful reminder of the betrayal. Michael answered on the third ring. "Hey, Tarek, what's up?" Tarek's voice was steady, but his words cut through the air with a cold precision. "We need to talk, Michael. It's urgent. Can you meet me in the office?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Sure. I'll be there in 30. Tarek hung up the phone, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. In 30 minutes, they would confront Michael. Tarek didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain, whatever happened next would change everything. When Michael arrived, he was his usual self, calm, collected, and seemingly unaware of the storm that was about to hit. He walked into the office, flashing a friendly smile. "Hey, Tarek." "Lauren. What's going on?" Tarek couldn't look him in the eye. Instead, he turned the laptop toward him, revealing the damning evidence. "Michael," Tarek said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Why?" Michael's eyes flicked to the screen, and his expression faltered for just a split second. But it was enough. Tarek saw it, the brief moment of guilt, of fear. Michael wasn't as calm as he had seemed. "You," Tarek's voice shook, but he fought to keep it steady. "You sold us out." Michael swallowed hard, his face turning pale. "Tarek, I trusted you," Tarek said, his anger finally breaking through. "I believed in you. How could you do this to us? To me?" Michael took a step back, his eyes darting nervously between Tarek and Lauren. He was clearly scrambling for an explanation, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable. I didn't mean for it to go this far," Michael said, his voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing. Greg promised me a way out. A chance to get ahead. Tarek's eyes burned with fury. So you thought betraying us was the way out? Michael hung his head. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But when Reynolds offered me that deal, No, Tarek interrupted, his voice cold. You don't get to make excuses. You betrayed everything we've worked for. Everything I've worked for. Lauren stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. You need to leave, Michael. We're done here. Michael's face crumpled in despair. Please, Tarek. I never wanted it to come to this. I was just trying to survive. But it was too late for apologies. Tarek didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Michael's actions spoke for themselves. The betrayal was final. The damage had been done. As Michael left the office, Tarek felt a deep sense of loss. He had lost more than just an employee. He had lost a friend. And yet, he knew there was no other choice. Trust was everything in this business, and once it was broken, it couldn't be repaired. The fallout from Michael's betrayal was swift and brutal. In the days following his departure from Green Tech, the ripple effects were felt in every corner of the company. Tarek had to make difficult decisions that tested his leadership, his resolve, and his belief in the people around him. Michael's actions had shaken the foundation of Green Tech, but Tarek was determined not to let it destroy everything they had worked so hard for. The first priority was damage control. The team had to be reassured that they were still on solid ground. Tarek called an all-hands meeting, bringing everyone into the conference room. He stood at the front, his face etched with the weight of recent events. I'm sure you're all aware of what's happened, he began, his voice steady, though there was a sharp edge to it. Michael betrayed us. He betrayed me. And he betrayed every single one of you. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Tarek paused, letting the silence settle. We can't change what happened, but we can control how we move forward. We have to learn from this. We have to keep pushing. Green Tech isn't just about one person. It's about all of us. And as long as we're together, we'll come out stronger. The team's reaction was mixed. Some seemed visibly shaken, others were angry, but all were listening. Tarek knew that his words had to mean more than just reassurance. He had to prove that Green Tech could survive even the worst betrayal. From this moment forward, we're doubling down on our commitment to the project, Tarek continued. We're going to make Green Tech the success it was always meant to be. We're going to finish the pilot, we're going to expand the technology, and we're going to change the energy landscape. But I need every one of you. We're in this together, or we're not in it at all. There was a long pause before Michael's former team members spoke up. It was Lauren who broke the silence, her voice full of resolve. Tarek's right. This betrayal doesn't define us. What defines us is our vision. We believe in what we're building, and we're not backing down. A few heads nodded around the room. Slowly, the mood began to shift. They were a team, after all, this wasn't the first challenge they had faced, and it wouldn't be the last. As the meeting concluded, Tarek felt a slight sense of relief. The worst of the internal storm had passed. But the external storm was just beginning. The next few weeks were filled with intense focus. Green Tech couldn't afford to lose momentum, especially not after everything that had happened. The city pilot project was nearing its final phase, and Tarek knew that this was their moment to prove themselves, not just to the world, but to their investors, including Greg Reynolds. Greg had been mostly silent after Michael's betrayal. Tarek had expected him to take advantage of the situation, maybe even try to take control of the project, but so far, there had been no major moves from the venture capitalist. It was as if he was waiting for Green Tech to either implode or show that it could rise above the challenges. Tarek was determined to show him the latter. In the meantime, the media had caught wind of the scandal. The headlines were everywhere: green tech betrayed by insider, corporate sabotage in the startup world, how a betrayed founder is rebuilding his company. Tarek had to manage the PR disaster while simultaneously keeping the technology on track. Every day felt like an uphill battle. But Tarek wasn't going to back down. He worked closely with the engineers to fine-tune the technology, making sure the grid system would function at optimal levels during the pilot's final test. The stakes were higher than ever. If green tech succeeded, they would have the proof they needed to scale the technology to new cities and new markets. If they failed, it could spell the end of the company, and potentially tarnish his reputation for good. The day of the final test arrived. Tarek stood outside the city's main control center, his heart pounding in his chest. The pilot project was about to go live on a much larger scale. This was the moment that would either make or break everything. Lauren stood beside him, a rare smile on her face. "You did it, Tarek. We did it. The system's ready." Tarek looked at the bustling control center. The team was inside, monitoring every detail. The new technology was about to be integrated into the grid in real time. This was their chance to prove to the world that green tech wasn't just a startup, it was the future of energy. "Let's get this done," Tarek said, his voice low but confident. The system was activated, and for the next few hours, Tarek and the team watched as the grid responded to the new technology. There were some minor hiccups, glitches in the data that required quick thinking and adjustments, but overall, the results were overwhelmingly positive. The grid was stabilizing. Energy efficiency was improving. The system was working better than they had ever imagined. By the end of the day, it was clear that the pilot had been a success. The next few days were a whirlwind of celebration and press interviews. Green Tech's success was all over the news. The headlines were changing: Green Tech's revolutionary grid technology is the future of energy, startup overcomes betrayal to deliver game-changing solution, how one entrepreneur is shaping the future of clean energy. Tarek tried to stay grounded. The media hype was intoxicating, but he knew it was just the beginning. They had proven they could do it, they had built the technology, and it worked. But now they had to scale it, expand it, and take it to the world. Greg Reynolds finally made his move, calling Tarek into his office for a meeting. Tarek knew this was the moment that would define their future with him. He walked into the sleek, high-rise office building, his mind focused on the task at hand. Greg was sitting behind his massive desk, the picture of corporate power. "Tarek," he greeted, his tone neutral. "I've been watching your team. Impressive work on the pilot project. You've got something real here." "Thank you," Tarek replied, keeping his voice steady. "It's been a long road, but we've only just begun." Greg leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of his face. "You've proven the technology works. But now comes the hard part, scaling it. Expanding it to more cities, getting it to the mass market. You'll need resources, connections, and, most importantly, more money." Tarek felt a surge of anxiety but fought to keep his composure. "We've built something solid. I don't want to lose control of it. I won't let it become another corporate pawn." Greg smiled, a glint of understanding in his eyes. "You won't lose control, yet. But understand this, if we're going to change the world, you'll need to make some compromises." Tarek stared back at him, weighing his options. This was the moment that would shape everything. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to lose sight of what he had built. "I'm not here to compromise on our vision," Tarek said firmly. "We'll work together, but we're doing it on our terms." Greg's smile widened. "We'll see about that." As Tarek walked out of the meeting, he felt a quiet sense of victory. He had held his ground, and now green tech was poised to change the world. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Tarek had fought for his company, and he would continue to fight, for green tech, for his team, and for the world-changing vision that had started it all. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but Tariq was ready. He had come a long way from the hopeless student with a crazy idea. Now, he was the CEO of a company that could redefine the future of energy. And no one, not even betrayal, could stop him. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?